Let's face it, if you're a man, then you are probably dealing with problems and challenges with women. Now, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. Your success with women literally boils down to one thing. The bad news is, if you don't have it, nothing else will work. All of the money, good looks, and all of the best pickup and game skills out there will fail without you mastering this one thing. And that one thing is frame. The answers to ending your pain and suffering and to start living an amazing life with women is just one click away. Click the link and let's get started. Are you? All right. Welcome to today's pod class. Is she too young for you, bro? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about age gap again, because I've talked about this before, I think recently, but we're also going to talk about like age of consent and when is a girl like too young to make her own mating decisions. All right. And it's an important topic to get into because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions everywhere about this. All right. This is misconceptions in the regular mainstream world, as well as misconceptions in the men's help communities like the red pill community, the manosphere. I think there's misconceptions there, big ones. All right. And so we're going to break all this stuff down because it's actually kind of an important topic, whether or not a girl is too young or not, and miscalculating that. It's not just a legal problem. It's a problem ethically and morally, and also a problem in terms of your prognosis for success in your relationships, depending on what it is you're looking for. But it's a very difficult, it's very important because mainly it affects the girl's prognosis for her ability for happiness in her future outcomes. Okay, if that's not if this is not approached the right way. However, it's hard to talk about in an objective way because everyone has their own agenda when it comes to this topic. All right, it's a very triggering topic. And so we're going to breach this. And if you're listening to this, depending on wherever you sit in this conversation and with wherever your opinion is, you're going to feel, you may feel a little triggered by this conversation we're about to have one way or the other. Okay. Because I find that, again, people are not objective about this. And so chances are you're not objective either. And that's okay. So I'm going to ask that you guys sort of bag your preconceived notions. Remember, this is a channel and a show where we have higher level discussions about relationships, sex and dating related topics, as well as mindset related topics. And so we're not here to grift, either or fallacies towards you guys and stimulate anxiety and whatever. All right. Despite how clever my thumbnails may seem. Right. It's your jailbait. Right. All right. So, you do things to get noticed. Right. Of course. But, we're going to get into actionable information that is more of a nuanced discussion. So I'm asking that you are able and capable of having that type of discussion with me today. If you want to actually learn something. All right. So here's the thing, like, why do people care about this and why should we care? Right? Why should we give a crap? So the reasons most people care about this has nothing to do with the safety of the younger person. And in this case, I am going to be talking about male-female relationships where the man is older. Okay. That is the topic for today. Yes, it can be reversed. The woman could be older and the guy could be younger. But given the amount of stuff I have to cover today, that's a whole dynamic that would have to be breached in another show. But that's generally not the concern. Generally, no one's shaming or upset with a 35-year-old woman if she decides to hook up with a 21-year-old guy. Like generally that's not the eliciting a negative response from the world. It's when that dynamic is flipped where you get all the opinions, right? And people feel the need to share those opinions with everybody involved and with that couple as if it's their business, right? So there's a reason why it's triggering for people, all right? And it's not the safety of the girl. It's not for the girl's well-being. That is what the virtue signalers, right? People who want to seem like they're good, okay, will say it's about. And it is not anything about that. Because they're not having, discussions about how it could be harmful or presenting that idea in an objective way. They're instead triggered, and you can see how people's responses to age gapped relationships, or when they feel the girl is too young, right? You can see that their responses are more protective over their own egos or trying to fulfill their own mammalian brain mating agenda. And so when people get like triggered by stuff and they have these visceral reactions to things, I mean, it is kind of the commonplace now on the internet anyway. So people do it more just because that's how they do things, right? But, when you have certain themes and topics that, will classically cause triggering responses to people, the reason for that is because there's some sort of existential threat, right? So there's some sort of threat to their existence when it comes to either mating or survival. And mating is even more powerful than survival. And so people become very opinionated and they become very triggered, visceral. They lose objectivity when topics are leaning into a threat to their mating success or existence, right? And so you'll run into a lot of ego protection. You'll run into a lot of capping, basically. You'll run into a lot of opinions that are more self-serving. And this is one of those topics. So people are not, giving their opinions because they care about the young woman's well-being. All right. I want to say that right off the bat. So all the people that want to jump on and, give their opinions about how this is wrong, that's wrong, and morally grandstand, 99% of those people, most of those people are not coming from a place of actually wanting to protect, it will say an innocent party from being taken advantage of or abused or whatever, victimized, right? That's not what it is. All right. So let's look at what the real reasons are. Okay. So here's the demographics and the reasons, the existential threats that happen with people when they have criticisms of age gapped relationships or, when they think a girl is too young for something. All right. So older women will see younger women as a threat to their mate value. Okay. So I say older women, that's relative, but usually over 30. I mean, but even the 25-year-old could see a 21-year-old as a threat. You know what I mean? So that can be seen that way. Generally speaking, down to a certain age, usually around 18 or 19, is about the bottom for when a girl might see the younger one as a threat for her age and attractiveness, but generally it's not too extreme for like it's more contextual when it's the 24, 25-year-old seeing the 19-year-old as a threat. But the 30-year-old, it's a lot less. It's not quite contextual. That 30-year-old knows that she has an impending mate value loss compared to where she was at just to her turning 30 and what that means, and as she ages. And so knowing that that's there, or at least feeling like that's there, older women, tend to see these younger women as threat to their mate value and their options, even if they are. I understand why I say a threat. This is in the mammalian brain. This is in the instincts. It's not necessarily. It's an instinctual reaction. It's not necessarily a logical one. Like a girl could be 32, let's say 35, and super gorgeous, great genetics, takes care of her body, better looking than most 21-year-olds, let's say. Um, she could be 40, 45 years old, looking better than most 21-year-olds. I've seen and know women personally who are fit that category. However, there's still a small part of them that will feel threatened just because of, the younger age being seen as valuable in the sexual marketplace by both men and women due to fertility and other things. Even if it's not objectively true, it's the signal of it. So that 40-year-old woman who's a fitness model and absolutely gorgeous, she might be a little threatened by that 21-year-old mid. That doesn't look quite as good, but looks good enough. You know what I mean? And so she might feel a little bit of that. Okay, that's natural thing to feel. All right, that's natural. And so, this is one category. It's not the only one because there's guys too, and there's other women too. So we'll get into those. But the main category that seems to be driving it is the older women feeling a threat to their mate value. So they're constantly trying to convince the sexual marketplace of their value. And unfortunately, the message that we have in mainstream thinking now is more of a feminist narrative, which tends to put male traits and characteristics onto women and have women use those standards for what they think their value is. So a 35 or 40-year-old woman might be, well, I'm stronger and I'm more independent than a 21-year-old. I make more money. I've been through more things in life. I have, two beautiful children. I, have a great job. I'm more independent and more, let's say, will be more on an equal footing to a man. So I'll be able to provide that value, these are things that a woman might think if without having researched these topics at all in her mid 30s or 40s. These are the caps that she might give for the reason why, and I don't put up with stuff, either, like that kind of thing. Well, those things aren't attractive at all to a guy. Like none of those things that I listed there. And I'm sure you could list more things than what I thought about just this second, right? These are not things that increase a girl's mate value. Like not even one bit. And so that's part of the problem is you have older women who are taking on male traits and thinking that the sexual marketplace should value them for these traits. Like, for example, her job or career success, right? And when the sexual marketplace, meaning men and potential dating options, don't respond to her in the way that she thinks that they should, then she's angry at the men for not responding to her wishes of what she thinks should make her more valuable. And so you run into that a lot. Older women trying to, basically ego protect and state their value and why they're better than the younger, hotter girl. Okay. And then they use categories that don't make them really more valuable in any sense to a guy who'd want to date them or mate them. Right. And then if the guy doesn't agree, like, yes, you're strong and you have a career. And I think that's great. It makes you an awesome catch. Like if the guy's not agreeing with those things, yes, so you're strong and domineering woman. That's what I really like. The guy's not agreeing to that shit, then it's like the guy gets shamed for it, So this is part of, what you see going on. And when they see age gap relationships, these are the women who will tend to insult the girl. Okay. Even if the girl is of consensual adult age, that will tend to insult the girl. They'll insult the girl's maturity, her intelligence, and her abilities in order to try to increase their perception of value. And the worst ones are the ones who are with husbands or married or with boyfriends, because they're worried on an existential level. They're worried that their guy will see a guy that's in their age category with a younger, hotter woman. Their threat is that that guy will trade her in for a younger, hotter model. And instead of showing up to her husband, her long-term boyfriend, and thinking, well, how can I be a better partner to this guy so that doesn't happen? Instead, it's, well, I'm going to shame men in general and put social pressure on men and try to say that if you were to go for the younger, hotter model, that would make you, something wrong with you, right? So you're a this, that, and the other, right? You're a bad person as a guy if you date younger, because women of a certain age have so much more value. And that's, of course, a losing proposition. When a girl takes that proposition, she's losing that argument. And girls do often get left, when they're unpleasant to be around. The reality is the attachment and the emotional attachment to your partner is what transcends him from trading her in. Most guys will have what we call the marriage goggles, will see their partner as the most attractive, best option over time, provided they met, at a time when she was very attractive to him, and they've built that emotional connection. That's what neurochemicals do and emotions do for you. They're a benefit to long-term relationships. So a guy with an emotional attachment to his, 40, 50-year-old wife is not necessarily going to trade her in for a younger model, provided that they've maintained that attachment, they have a good sexual life and attachment together, and they're good for each other. So like, instead of being a better partner, which is what women should do and guys should do, quite frankly, they end up, trying to establish that they're better through shame and guilt and social pressure. And so most of the criticisms of age gap relationships, or a lot of them, are driven by that. Okay. And they're driven by older women devaluing younger women by saying that they're immature, they can't make their own decisions, and that's why they're with this guy. And then they'll also throw in other things like daddy issues, or she's only after his money. Those two things, right? Which are both proven actually by research to not be true. So then you have, what other categories do we have? We have younger women. Okay, so you got younger women who look to compete with their peers. So you have the 21-year-old girls, let's say, that are friends with the 21-year-old, and that 21-year-old is dating a guy who's in his mid-30s or something. Let's just say that's what it is, right? And so the 21-year-old single girls that are her friends or her inner social circles, they want intrasexual competition. They want to compete and increase their value over the other girls around them. This is how girls are, especially even, I say more so. Well, I don't know about more so than men, but at least more divisively oftentimes than men. Women do compete with each other, and it's a natural thing that they do. It's part of them. Again, it's part of their instinctual brain. Okay. And they're trying to always find these little ways to increase their value above their social circles, even their best of friends. Some of them do it divisively by cutting their friends down. Some of them do it just by lifting themselves up higher in some way. And so that's what you run into, is you run into younger girls who will have a peer girl of similar age dating an older guy, and that older guy she's having a better time with that older guy than she is, than her peers are having with guys within the same age, range or category. And so they're going to find ways to sort of shame that relationship because they want to seem and feel better, when the reality is they may not have been picked by that older, more valuable guy. Like, they weren't even an option for that guy. You know what I'm saying? And so, and if they were, it's like, well, it didn't get him, and they're single, or they're not quite in relationships that make them happy. So they're trying to find ways, again, to cut down the younger girl who's having a better time with the older dude. So that's what you'll run into that. And then you'll also run into younger women who are looking to seek acceptance from the older women who are devaluing, those age gap relationships, right? Trying to protect their mate value. So, and there's also the younger woman foreseeing the future self of her in the older woman. So she foresees, well, someday I'll be 35 or 40, and I don't want the guy that I'm with, or the options that I have, to be looking at girls my age, younger options that are maybe younger or better looking, or seen as better. And so I'm going to jump on this bandwagon and say, nobody wants to date old men. because that's going to protect my older self, and I'll get social acceptance from the older girls in my circles. You know what I mean? Maybe older sisters, older family members, or maybe coworkers or friends, or just people on the internet, who knows? And so through the need of, social acceptance, and for protecting her future self, younger women are motivated to say, well, that older men are gross, despite data that proves that that is not the general consensus. Okay. Most women that are younger don't find older men gross. When they say that, they're thinking of older, unattractive men. When it's an attractive guy that happens to be 15, 20, even 25, 30 years older, the guy maintains his attractiveness and appearance of, and attractiveness can be denoted by masculinity and appearance of virility. Younger girls are attracted to a large percentage, over half. Okay. So these are the caps though, right? These are the ego protection. This is protecting themselves. So you got women doing that. All right. Now you got men doing it too, though. Okay. So lower value men who perceive that they can't compete with men of their, peers, right? Who can get more attractive and younger women. They'll shame these guys for dating younger women. It's like the reality is they can't compete with them. They can't get those girls. So they're going to instead find ways of trying to increase their mate value through shaming these guys, which is easy to do because they can just pile on the female narrative, which is that these age gap relationships are predatory and wrong. That's a female narrative put out by women who don't have great options for mates. Okay. You'll notice that a lot of women with good options, happy relationships really don't care and are not a part of these discussions usually, on any side of it. They just don't care. Right. So it's the ones who are not having mate success that really seem to be opinionated most of the time. And same with the men. Right. So and lower value men are also trying to seek acceptance and protect their sexual access from the older, less attractive women that they have access to. All right. So they're the ones who also pile on. Right. So when so-and-so's, when Joe Schmo's wife, Karen, okay, who's 38 years old and, has a short haircut and, is 50 pounds overweight, wants to criticize up and down, Joe's friend for dating the 20-something-year-old who's hotter than she is, then Joe Schmo will jump right on that too. Oh yeah, well, he's just immature. She has daddy issues, this and that and the other. Like he'll jump right on because he wants to protect his sexual access, his rare sexual access to his dumpy wife, right? Like that's his objective, and people hate it when I talk like this, because it's fucking real and honest. You know what I'm saying? So sorry guys. If that fits your category, I'm not going to protect you. Okay. I'm going to call it like it is. And so if you're capping, that's on you. All right. And so these are reasons we can't have these conversations most of the time, because most people fit into one of these categories. You know what I mean? So not being objective. And there is also, that the guys who are, we also have men who are in support of dating younger and younger and younger women because they're trying to protect their desire and maybe their objective in doing so. All right. And so we'll get into why that might be a reason as well. But, there's the fact that some men want to catch a girl while she's young and before she has had sexual experiences, so that he can have the assurance that he's the one who's going to imprint her sexually, right? And so he wants to have more control over his relationship, and he wants to be her hypergamous best choice. And he thinks the way to do that is to go and seek younger and younger women. All right. You'll hear guys in comments talking about trying to find virgins. And you'll hear guys on the internet talking about trying to find their virgin bride and trying to find younger girls before they get ran through and that sort of thing. All right. And so, some men will argue vehemently for the idea of adult males being with younger girls who maybe are not even of age of um, emotional development, but maybe they want to push the age of consent, in some of these countries. And we'll talk about age of consent and legalities. And so you have that other segment of men too. And those men can be seen as predatory, and it makes sense that they would be seen that as that. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with wanting, we'll say, an untainted girl, but you run into a problem when the lower ceiling is that you start to get into deficits in emotional development. Basically, you're getting into an underdeveloped brain and getting into a brain that is not prepared or ready for the kind of romantic relationship that you envision, and so this is where you run into that problem. All right. So nothing wrong with wanting a girl to not be ran through, so to speak, but trying to push that age limit lower and lower to find that girl, well, that becomes really problematic and can be seen as predatory. And a lot of the guys that have that mindset, are predatory. I mean, they are predatory. Or we'll say it like this: a lot of guys with a predatory mindset use that sort of reasoning and argument. That's how I'll say it, because I don't know what the numbers are. There are probably guys who aren't trying to be predatory, who just think that way. You know what I mean? They think that that there's nothing wrong with it, and they would happily pick up on a 15-year-old girl or something, even if they're in their 30s or 40s, thinking that's okay, right? And they don't think they're being predatory because they've latched onto ideology. But the reality is, and I'll get into brain science, that's probably not good. And so and certainly guys who are actually predatory and want to predate on women, they use that sort of stuff. So you have the other side of it. People will vehemently defend age gapped relationships, and particularly defend, going younger and younger, because it fits their agenda as well, right? So everybody is selfish. Nobody is being objective. I am being as objective as possible here in this thing. All right. Well, I'd say I'm doing a good job at it, to be honest. So we aren't all Leonardos. We aren't. Okay. And thank you very much. Great breakdown on female to female intersexual competition. Oh, it gets better. Life's a competition. Yes, it is. If you guys have super chats, it helps my algorithms. If you have questions, I'll make sure I get to it. I was 21 and dating a 35-year-old. Nobody had an issue. I was 32, dating a 21-year-old, and I was taking advantage of her. Yes, roll eyes. And absolutely, when it's the guy going for the younger girls, the narrative is that it's somehow predatory. And so we're going to get into when it is predatory, when it isn't. Okay. And so here's an interesting take. Nick says, I had my heart broken when I was younger by an older girl. These women are predators. They can be. All right. And so there are women predators. If you don't believe it, just do a search up of women who are teachers hooking up with kids, and you're going to get a website that lists how many times a year that happens in different places. And it's women hooking up with male students, and it's all over the place. So there are predatory women who get off on the control that they have on younger, males who are underdeveloped. We're not even talking about a 22-year-old guy and a 40-year-old girl situation. We're talking about, a 26-year-old teacher or something and like a 14-year-old kid, right? So there are women that enjoy the predatory side of things themselves, right? Which isn't good for all those involved. I'm a 39-year-old dating a 22-year-old medical student right now. So this is a timely stream. Well, good. I'm glad that I'm here. All right. So let's keep going. So just don't date kids. All right. Sounds good. Shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, it shouldn't be, but we're even going to get into it deeper than that, because you're going to be surprised at what I have to say about some ages. And you're probably not going to, a lot of you guys are going to be surprised and maybe upset when I get into the science. And that's That's okay. I'm here to help. All right. What I'm about to tell you is not what the red pill and manosphere space is saying. FYI. Okay. This is proof, and I hopefully we can make this more mainstream knowledge what I'm about to say. All right. Because it really, the safety and well-being of young people is at stake here. And so I want to change the narrative of what's going on, particularly about, particularly when it comes to young women. All right. But now getting into back to shaming and back to some of the tactics. So we got the demographics, the different types of people that are, trying. The reason why people get so upset about it has everything to do with either intra-sexual competition, so competing with their fellow man or competing with their fellow female for options, or intersexual competition, which is meaning trying to increase the perception of mate value to their options that they have. And this exists even when people are in relationships. They don't want their relationship partner to perceive that they have better options than them. So that's where it all comes from. That's where all of the naysayers and even some of the people who are super positive on dating super young women or age gapped relationships, they're normally not coming from a place of objectivity. Some of the common ways of shaming people in these relationships are to claim the man is predatory. That's the most top way of doing it, right? To claim that a man is a predator. All right. Now, the problem with that is she's of an age of emotional adult development. So she's an adult and she's of an age of consent. And not only is it legal, but it makes sense from a brain development perspective. And she's in the relationship consensually. Is the man really being predatory? That is, I think, degrading to the woman to say that. It's taking away her agency. And I find it interesting. It's like the narrative out there wants to have women being strong and independent, and women can do everything a man can do. And that's what all that stuff, until it comes to personal accountability. And then we want to somehow absolve women of personal accountability, which is disrespectful to women. Like, I never understood that. Like, why don't we respect women more? People are like, you don't respect women because I don't follow a blind feminist narrative that people will think I have this misogynistic message, or because I think that men and women are different biologically, that somehow makes me, anti-women. It's not true. Okay. The fact is, I respect women more than most of your feminist narrative people out there, because I want to give women agency. They have the rights to make decisions, and that means they have also have to retain the ability to have the consequences for those decisions. Right. And so a young girl who is making a choice to be with an older man and is mature enough to make that choice, that's not a predatory relationship. Okay. That's not the definition of that. And by calling it that, we're degrading the girl and saying that she's too stupid to make her choices. Okay. And we're also really degrading women out there who have been victims by predatory men, because there are real victims out there. Okay. The young girl in her, mid 20s who's mature enough to date an older guy is not a victim. Like, a 12-year-old or something being groomed sexually, by some guy in his 20s or something like that. Right. Those are very, very different scenarios. And to call, this woman who's of adult age making adult decisions a victim and the guy a predator, it's not just misplaced, but it's unethical, it's immoral, and it's wrong. And people who do that just to ego protect really need to check themselves. Right? Because they're not helping anyone. They're really harming people with that narrative, because it takes the word predator and it takes the words like abuse and it makes those meaningless. All right. But that's the most common thing you'll get. Another common shaming tact is, you get this one sometimes. If the woman is like in her 20s and hot, right, and the guy is elderly, like above 60, maybe 70, 80s. You know what I mean? Yeah, like the Al Pacino and his girlfriend, she's a hot, attractive 30-year-old or thinks she is. He's like 85. People say the woman is predatory. That's rare. Not as often, but you'll say, oh, the woman, she's just using him for his money or whatever. Maybe that's her reasons behind it. But here's the thing, like, two consenting adults, if that elderly man is of, sound mind, is it a predatory scenario on the woman? Right? Not really. The guy's decided to get into an exchange. He wanted a pretty girl. She wanted whatever he had to offer, which is probably his assets. And they're in a relationship because of it. It's two adults making a decision. Really, it's none of our business. And we can criticize that relationship if we want to, but to call her a predator, nah, that's overstepping now, isn't it? Because there are truthfully female predators, and so we need to, words mean things, right? Now the other one is to claim that a man it's like a predator, but it's claiming the man is like a pedophile. All right. So to claim the man is like, even if the girl is like in her 20s and he's, let's say 15, 20 years older, they're going to claim the guy is somehow a pedophile and they'll infantilize the adult woman. I get that one a lot. I'm 20 years older than my girlfriend. All right. And so my girlfriend's a hot mid-20s girl. Okay. But to some people, she may look a little younger or whatever. She's in her mid-20s. Like, she's of adult age, but people will infantilize her. Look at, he's out with a 16-year-old or something like that. They'll have things to say about it. Why do people not just shut their mouths, right? Why is it they have something to say? It goes back to they're protecting their egos, right? They're ego protecting, they're capping because of a threat that relationship represents to them. That's why, now when men do this, I want to note something. When men say, like, there's a relationship with two consenting adults, but there's an age gap, when men want to infantilize the young woman and claim that the man is somehow predatory or pedophile, that is a red flag, particularly when men do it, because that is a warning sign that man is a possible sexual predator himself. Think about it. The type of guy who would look at an adult woman and sexually infantilize her, in other words, picture her as a child or a young teen and think of her in a sexual manner, right? And then project that this older man is now predating on this teen or child woman, right? That is somebody who looks at underage girls sexually. That is somebody who the word teen shows up in his porn search history a lot, so that is somebody to be aware of. So when these guys jump on my Twitter and they have their things to say, it's like, you just showed me who you were, which is a sexual predator. People have had something to say, about my relationship, that's what they've dined themselves out. They're the ones thinking about this adult woman as if she's a young teenager and projecting their sexual thoughts into that. So keep that in mind, critics who may be listening to this. When you say certain things, you are definitely letting us know who you really are. So now on that, another way is to disrespect the adult woman in the age gap relationship by claiming she has no agency and she's too immature. That's pretty normal. It's usually like an underhanded thing. They'll say, oh, the guy is the terrible predator because, she's just incapable and immature isn't able to make her own decisions. That's the underhanded thing they'll say about the woman. It's very disrespectful, again, to the woman and to her agency. However, that's what people do. Another thing that people will do is they'll trivialize a woman's attachment needs by claiming, she has daddy issues or some sort of attachment problem or psychological problem. That's proven actually to be untrue as well. They've done actual research and studies, and they found that, and I'll get into that data later, but they found that attachment issues were not prevalent in girls in age gap relationships. And we're talking 10 plus years for that study. So that's an untrue claim. That's again another way of sort of really being disrespectful to the girl, as if, in trivializing, because people with, young women with attachment issues due to, problems with dad or problems growing up, that's a real thing. It's not to be trivialized, but we call it, a daddy issue. You know what I mean? and just immediately think that about a woman going for an older guy. Yeah, it's not objectively true at all. And, it's really degrading to the woman's attachment needs. Okay. So all of these attempts to save the girl, well, you can see that they're not saving the girl at all. Generally speaking, they're pretty degrading to the girl and her decision making, assuming she's in a consensual relationship, right? Now, some men want to catch. Oh yeah, I mentioned this before. So there's the guys. The other criticisms that you'll get is men wanting to catch those girls when they're super young, right, and wanting to imprint them themselves. So this causes these guys, to argue vehemently for age gap and also pushing that age younger. You'll have a lot of guys who may show up, I'm sure, in my comment section, have some things to say about this video. Okay. So this discussion, to be clear, is focusing on age gap relationships. So we're saying over a 7-year gap. Okay. Generally speaking, women are attracted to guys that are 1 to 3 years, older the most. And, kind of the next category, it's not considered too far gapped, would be, the 3 to 6 years. So 7 years or more is when you start to get in a territory of an age gap that becomes maybe socially unacceptable. And the bigger that gap becomes, the more socially unacceptable it is. So we're going to focus on that. And we're going to focus on the guy being older than the girl. And we're also going to focus on the idea of dating these girls when they're really young. And so how young is too young, right? That's the jailbait thumbnail. So we're going to focus on the science and stuff behind that and look at that argument objectively. All right. And so here's a fact about our brains. Okay. The male and female brains are not these blank slates. Okay. We have reports and studies that show, and there are countless amounts that show that newborn males and females have very different brain circuitry. All right. So this idea that gender and sex characteristics can be separated is really not fitting with biology or science. Okay. I don't want to get into the trans pro or con argument. I don't care what people do in their adult lives. If people want to, be different than what their sex characteristics are, that's their business. All right. So I'm not here to even have that discussion today, but the narrative or idea that we're all somehow the same and then that social conditioning is what makes us different is completely false from a biological perspective. It just is. And you can't separate sex characteristics from gender identity, unpopular opinion to some people I know, because there are hormonal differences that dramatically shape their future thoughts, feelings, and behaviors down to the first years of life. So, unpopular opinion, male and female brains are fundamentally different. This is why my approach to relationship dynamics, dating dynamics, right, is more effective and also widely unpopular by a lot of mainstream thinkers, is because I treat the male and female brain as being different, because they are different. I look at those things as being different. And then when we talk about communication and needs and perceiving the world and processing emotions, there are fundamental differences based on sex characteristics. Okay. And then from there, of course, we get into individual nuances. Obviously the individual is more important than the general characteristics, but we have to approach, and I recommend you approach your relationships, at least with a baseline understanding that your male brain is different than her female brain. And therefore, what you normally do to communicate is probably not going to connect well with that girl who's fundamentally different in how she thinks, right? And vice versa for the women listening. So you have to, you know, you have to look at it like that. And if we're to understand communication models and intergender dynamics and dating and relationships and sex, we got to approach it like that. You know what I mean? We got to understand that there are differences here so we can respect those differences and, make ourselves, you know, learn some skill sets to communicate with our partners and our sexual options and, our dating options in a way that's going to resonate better with them, more attractive, all of those things, right? So that's the first fact here is that the male and female brains are different. And so I know, and we have an example of Nick in the chat who said that he was in a predatory relationship with an older female, and it kind of messed him up. Yes, that can definitely happen. So young boys can be predated on just like young girls. However, girls do seem to be more susceptible to sexual imprinting from abuse or predatory relationships than boys. Doesn't mean that it isn't harmful for a boy too. It just means it's not the same. All right. So when we're talking about young girls, I mean, we inherently know this, imprinting a young girl in her early sexual experiences, those are going to be more imprinting and potentially more damaging to her, potential later on than maybe the guy. Okay. And it's just to how we respond emotionally to this sexual event and how guys and girls are different. All right. And we know this inherently, like the 15-year-old boy, okay, who manages to bang a 25-year-old teacher. Not everybody's that concerned about that 15-year-old boy. They should be, because that kid might have some problems, right? From that experience, depending on what happened. But he's tended to be ignored. He shouldn't be ignored, but they tend to look at it like that. But the reality is the 15-year-old girl in the relationship and banging the 25-year-old teacher is probably more damaging to her potential success than the guy's potential success. I mean, that's just the reality of it. All right. So we understand and should understand that, okay, women are more susceptible to being affected or damaged by her early sexual experiences. And therefore, it just needs to be part of that discussion. We need to sort of understand that and consider that when we consider the age for when it's appropriate for a woman to be sexually active at all, and for a woman to be in a relationship with an older man. Okay, when do we think that's an appropriate thing? We need to consider that women are susceptible. All right, and that's hypergamy is the reason, is a big part of it. So if you understand a little bit about hypergamy and you believe it, that it's a real thing to some degree, at least, then you understand that why it can be so damaging to a woman. All right, and I can explain that at some point. Well, actually, I will explain it right now. So when you look at it like this, okay, so she is looking to, and people screw hypergamy up all the time. All right. Especially red pill dudes for whatever reason, even though Rollo kind of pioneered stuff in his Rational Male, it seems to be, he has an understanding of it. Obviously that's really good, but people don't even listen to him. They listen to other people who listen to him. It's like the telephone game, and people tend to screw this up a lot. Okay. So the biggest mistakes of how hypergamy works, I see, is from red pill dudes in forums. You know what I mean? And so clear this up right now. So first thing about hypergamy is the drive to want to mate with the best genetic option that she can mate with, who also has the resources and ability to take care of her and the children. So really it's everything, and she's wanting to mate upwards. Okay. So we understand that. Where the misunderstanding comes in is that it's not a deterministic thing. Okay. Even Rollo says in Rational Male book series says that, but people don't seem to listen. It's not deterministic. And the reason why it's not deterministic is because it's subjective. In other words, it's her perceptions of who's higher mate value based on how she's perceiving the world and that relationships. It's due to her emotional reactions to the world. It's not an objective math problem. Okay. So, like, she could perceive because of her experiences with, let's say, the abusive guy that offers no value and ends up in jail, she could perceive that as the most intense emotional experience, that she's had. And therefore, that brought the intensity of the sexual experience, brought the intensity of the attachment, brought the, intensity of the trauma, which caused trauma bonding. And therefore, her brain can be skewed into believing that abusive prison guy is her hypergamous best option, when objectively it's not true. Okay. And so that's why it's subjective down to her brain and how her brain works. So now it's her experience with the guy and how she emotionally and sexually experiences that guy and perceives that guy. That's what determines whether she thinks he is the hypergamous best option or best she can do. That also determines the alpha widowing scenario. So, if she had the most intense, let's say, emotions for the guy that is in the toxic relationship and the guy went to jail and then they broke up, because he murdered somebody. All right. If that was her most intense experiences emotionally, sexually, and all across the board, hypergamously, she's viewing that guy as that most alpha or best option. Well, when she goes to the better guy who's objectively better, holds down a job, is more socially aware, has more things going for him, the emotions aren't as intense with that guy. Therefore, she's been alpha widowed. She doesn't have the same attachment or love for that better guy who's objectively better for her than the guy that she perceived as hypergamously, and it's on a hindbrain level, not a logical one, right? It's an experience level, emotional level. It's down to the instinctual level. And so she's her better option. She ends up not experiencing him as the better option. So she's not as excited. She's not as enthusiastic, sexually, not even as, and maybe not as enthusiastic. And therefore, that's where you run into this alpha widowing scenario where it can't be completely dedicated to the relationship she's in, can't be all in to that relationship, finds herself not wanting to be there, finds herself not emotionally satisfied or happy, finds herself looking for other options, maybe, and in ways that she doesn't want to. It puts a girl in a bad situation where she is building a life with a guy that basically she's not in love with, right? That's what happens when a girl's alpha widowed. So now, understanding that, now you understand why it's dangerous for a young girl who's still developing, getting with an older guy. That's not going to end in a marriage and a forever relationship, which most of the time and statistically it does not. What you have is sexual imprinting, and you have a gap now, a perceptual gap of power that she cannot make up in her adult years. So the 15-year-old girl, or let's say, that hooks up with the 25-year-old guy, that 25-year-old guy could be a loser drug dealer, okay, that, doesn't have anything going for him, isn't a high value man, whatever, but she experiences at 15 more intense emotions for the loser 25-year-old drug dealer in this age gapped relationship. She experiences those things so intensely because her brain is not fully developed yet. And so she doesn't have the development in her frontal lobe and executive functions of her brain to be emotionally controlled. So her emotions are haywire for, out of control lust and love for the 25-year-old crazy, like loser guy. Right. And the age gap puts him in a position of power too. So he's seen as this massive gap, right? Where she feels like there's this massive power differential, even though he's a douchebag, even though other 25-year-olds with things going for them and some basic gym time could probably best him in every category, could probably kick the dude's ass, make more money than him, even fuck better than this guy is fucking this girl, right? But even with all that, her most intense emotions were with that guy. And because of the age gap and because of her lack of emotional development, it's experienced, right? Her experience is so intense. And if he's the first that she's ever had sex with, add that to the mix, right? It's such an intense thing for her that when that fizzles out and her parents say you can't see him anymore or she wises up or whatever happens or he discards her, right? She can't make up that gap now. She can't make up that deficit. She could be with a really alpha dude who checks all the blocks, and logically she'll know he checks all the blocks, but she can't get out of a transactional mental framework because she can't have the emotions for the guy that she's trying to have a relationship with and build a life with, that she does feel like she likes. She does feel like she has some love for this guy, but she doesn't have the intense emotions, because those intense emotions are what's signaling the guy being the better sexual option, the better sexual choice, the better, the better option for mating. Okay. So she's not getting, and then we know this, like we know this culturally. We just don't know how to explain it scientifically, even though I'm doing that for you right now. That's not really, part of our vernacular, how to explain this scientifically. But when they say, like, the girl's like, well, it's white girls love the bad boys, like, well, what the fuck does that mean? The guy's a little douchebag selling fucking, selling drugs and doing nothing, and not eating enough, and certainly can't deadlift his own body weight. Well, what the fuck do you mean by bad boy? Right? He's not a bad boy. To me, a bad boy is a guy who's drug free and beating ass in the gym and and killing it in his startup business. That to me is a bad boy. Like, well, what do you mean by bad boy? Like it's not the simp versus this beta guy versus the edgy guy all the time, right? I mean, she could be with a dominant guy, but he's not a bad boy. Like, what does that mean? Well, it means that she's not experiencing this intense experience with this guy in this taboo relationship where the guy is older and the guy has all of this power over her. So whatever guy she ends up with, that guy has to be so domineering and alpha that, she experiences a more of an emotional experience because of this power differential. She has to feel this power differential as an adult, right, with another adult in a way that she can't replicate when she was 15. Now, in consults, when I've dealt with couples and with girls who've had this constraint, there are ways, okay, to try to maneuver around it, but it's very difficult and it's very uncertain and it's very unresearched. I can say anecdotally it's worked. And when I say it's worked, things like using a sexual dynamic like BDSM and Dom sub relationships, for example, can put someone in a power dynamic and a psychological dynamic where they are experiencing this level of dominance and authority, which makes them re-experience, this gap. So girls who have been, we'll say, victimized, okay, can actually overcome a lot of those things from a controlled, consensual sub-dom situation. That's one way. All right. There are also removing and unraveling the trauma. So if the girl heals from trauma that she's had from when she was younger, from some of these experiences, then she perceives these experiences as less intense in real time. And there's a possibility that the functional, healthy relationship, she can experience that as more intense than the dysfunctional ones of her past if she overcomes the trauma. So that's another way. So there are ways. The girl's not necessarily doomed, but boy, is she put at a deficit when an age gap relationship is in play and it imprints her when she is too young. Okay. So I am very much against doing that. And I'm very much against you guys listening to me right now, trying to do that so you can find your perfect virgin bride or whatever hell you're talking about. Okay. You're putting yourself in a position where you're going to damage a young girl. And and that's not good. So we'll talk about, but what is the age that's too young, right? So what age are we talking about? All right. So all right. I'm looking at, don't see any super chats. So we'll go in and continue. So what age is too young, right? So legally, all right, legally isn't a measure of what you should do. Okay. It's just the limits that have been decided by the legal system based on whatever data the, lawmakers used to make their legal arguments. Okay. So that data could be out of date. It could be good. It could be bad. And you find that they're all over the map. So legally, the age of consent for sex is somewhere between age 11 to 21 around the world. All right. Now, most countries and states are not age 11 for consent. Most common age is actually 16 for age of consent. There's also things to mitigate age gap, like underage sex, for example, versus, when they consider it illegal. So, like, if a girl is 15 and the guy is 17 or 18, for example, in some states that's legal, you know what I mean? Even though it's not a huge gap, but the guy can actually be, listed as a sexual predator for breaking, statutory rape laws. So there's statutory rape where this, and I'm not a legal expert, so I'm going to paraphrase all this stuff. But statutory rape basically states that the woman is not of sound enough or mature enough mind to make the decisions for herself. Therefore, the guy that's having sex with her is basically not doing so consensually because she's not of an age to consent, you know. And so that's where the argument comes from. And in different countries handle these things in different ways. Some prosecute the men differently than the women. Most do, actually. But most countries do range as far as consent to have sex in general between 14 and 18. And so that's where it's at. And for some, there's statutory rape laws. Once the girl is consensual, it doesn't matter the age of the other person or guy for that matter. Right. And so, but again, just because something's legal, does that make it correct or okay or optimal or ethical or moral? All right. Or good? No, not necessarily. Okay. So you can't look at just what the legal numbers are. All right. We got to look at other stuff. Because, like, what if there is an age gap? Like, should a 14-year-old, okay, so a 14-year-old, we say, can have consensual sex because their body is able to have consent, able to reproduce or whatever. So should that 14-year-old be able to hook up with a 50-year-old guy? Should that 14-year-old girl be able to get a relationship with a 50-year-old, or 45-year-old man or 40-year-old man? I mean, think about it. You know what I mean? Does that sit right with you? I don't know, So if the law said it was okay, then would it make it okay? So that's what I want to challenge here. We're not just going to look at the laws. We want to figure out our ethics and morals in this. And we want to do it without letting our personal instinctual biases set in. Okay. Now, why is that important? It's important particularly for women because, as I mentioned, woman can be damaged by a predatory relationship. And when she's damaged, before she's emotionally developed enough to, handle that type of relationship, it can be imprinting. All right. And toxic sexual relationships can be damaging on a neurological, psychological, and emotional level. And it could skew their sexual triggers and sexual responses. Okay. So girls' early sexual experiences, can damage her neurologically, psychologically, and emotionally. Though whether we consider it damage or not damage, they are skewing her early sexual experiences, are imprinting or skewing, her sexual triggers and proclivities later on in life. Okay. And it is also true, like, that sex in general can do that for consenting adults, but these experiences on a young brain that's still developing will leave a deeper and irreversible imprints, potentially irreversible, right? So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with some risk here, okay, a good amount. And so this means that a sexually active teen can mess up her ability to bond with sex in the type of healthy relationship she'd want later on in life. So when that girl's 30 years old and wants to eventually settle down and get married, we know this, which is why this is the reason why we talk about things like I talk about things like notch count and sexual behavior. I'm not trying to, grandstand morally or shame women. It's that I want women to retain their ability to have the type of relationship they would want later in life. And the problem is ratchet hoe behavior, okay, whether it starts at 15 or whether it starts at 21, doesn't, in general, sets them up for failure later on. It changes the way they process the sexual marketplace and in sex and process their relationship. It changes their reactions and their processes. Okay. And not in a good or productive way. And so I want more women to be able to be good partners for guys. And I want more guys to be able to be good partners for women. That's part of the goal, right? And there's no way we'll achieve that when women are doing ratchet hoe stuff, period. Okay. And so that's the reason why I'm vocal about it. But the earlier a girl starts off sexually, and especially if she starts off sexually or involves herself sexually in a predatory relationship with an older guy when she's too young, that greatly decreases her chances for success later on. She's not going to be a good partner for somebody later on in life. Period. You're not going to be able to do it, not without a ton of work. Now, if you're a woman listening to this, don't be discouraged and don't give up. Okay. If you're in your 30s and this describes who you were, don't just give up on yourself. There's a lot of work you can do, but you understand that we need to change the narrative. Okay. We need to change the narrative because there's young girls who think that it's okay to go, do the, do the typical American woman thing, which is run through a bunch of dudes and go through their 304 phase, right? Go through their hoe phase. And they think that they're going to turn around and just have healthy relationships. No, there's girls out there who, have hooked up with their teachers, have hooked up with older men when they were 14, 15, and they'll say, oh, well, I seduced my neighbor who was married, or I seduced this guy, whatever. I'm sure she did. I'm sure in her 15-year-old brain, that's exactly what happened. But that doesn't mean that that's going to make her now opened up for better chances for success later. Really, that's not setting her up for success later. That's setting her up for a lot of failure. And we have a lot of women who have done these things when they were younger, or at least wanted to do these things, who support young girls to do these things by saying, well, we're not going to shame you and for your decisions. And we're not going to, and they're supporting for girls to explore their sexuality at younger and younger ages. They turn around and say, no, you older men, don't you dare look at her. But meanwhile, she should explore her sexuality. She should run through dudes her own age. Is that better? So the morality and values are completely off track in mainstream world, right? I'm being looked at like I'm the bad person. I'm the fucking misogynist here. Because I'm the white dude who has shit to say. All right. I'm the bad guy. You know what I mean? By saying these things when I'm actually the one out here trying to protect these young women and change the narrative and put another narrative out there that's more accurate, which is that this is damaging to young girls. and we can't do it. And guys, when you're out in the dating marketplace, you need to be aware of these things and to date consensually. We have consensual relationships with adult women, not kids, not women whose brains aren't developed. And we'll get into what age that is. And probably not going to like it. Some of you guys aren't going to like the answer, because you want it to be younger, because then she's a virgin, blah, blah, virgins, right? Get her before she's run through. By the time she's out of high school, she's had 1,000 partners. Like all the bullshit you guys who don't actually have relationships with women tell yourselves. So I understand I'm going to get a vitriol reaction from some of you dudes, but you know what? I don't really give a shit. You guys need to grow up, level your life up. You know what I'm saying? You have more options with women. That's what I'm here for. And more options with women who are good options. And so the best way to help make our future generation have more options for good women is to recognize that women are having sex too early right now, period. And they need to hold off on that. Not just on sex with older men or age gap relationships, but sex in general. That probably needs to be held off. The average age for a girl having sex now is 15. I'm going to tell you, and I'll show you, and we'll talk about the data, but that is too young. The earlier a girl starts her sexual life, the greater her chances are of dealing with psychological problems, diagnosis of, anxiety issues, depression issues, and DSM diagnoses, as well as having more problems in terms of having bad relationship outcomes, reported unhappiness, children too early that they didn't plan for, all kinds of stuff, STDs, of course, all these things. A girl's prognosis is worse and worse the earlier she starts banging. And the more she bangs, and whether the guy's older or not, the worse it is for her. So we need to change that narrative first of all. All right. Because I know there's people out there that seem to think that hooking up with a 16-year-old should be just fine because they do it in Europe or whatever the fuck, Listen, I understand. I'm not shaming those guys for that narrative because that narrative exists there for a reason too. And that certainly things were different. Like even when my grandparents were younger, they were hooking up earlier. I get that, but we have science now. And so we need to update our thinking to the science of what it shows us. We're different now than what we used to be. Okay. Because the reality is this, we're not in tribes anymore. Okay. So let's reverse this. When we were hunter-gatherer tribes, and even through most, the lifespan, people were more likely to be killed by something by the time they hit 30. Yeah, sure, they had the capacity to live a lot longer than that, but something usually killed them earlier, And so and then also infanticide or having the baby die before it was born, or having the baby die within that first year or so of its life was really high and a lot more common for most of our history. So it made sense that women became reproductively capable and evolved to basically be physically capable of having sex early and earlier and earlier. So by the time a girl is 14, her body can have sex and have a baby. By the time a girl is 15, that is the average age. That's about when a girl is physically developed sexually. So a 15-year-old is ready physically to have sex, just like a 25-year-old woman. But that doesn't mean that psychologically they're there. See, we're in a different time frame now where our lifespan and expectancy and our expectations for how we want our lives to go has increased greatly. People aren't getting killed by the time they're 30 or so years old by some disease or ailment or injury or whatever. And babies aren't dying at the same rate that they have through most of our history. And so women are having children later, rightfully so, because of that. And women are also living longer, and our goals for our relationships are much different and much more involved. People expect a lot more out of a long-term relationship now than they did when they settled down in the 1930s or the 1950s or whatever it was. 100 years ago, people's expectations of happiness were much lower than they are now with the global sexual marketplace. And even the lifespan was lower as well. So we have different expectations. We have different things that we want. We're having children and families later, and we're living longer. So spitting out a kid before a girl is emotionally, mature enough to handle modern life in 2023 is not a good idea, right? That greatly cripples her chances for her success and happiness in life if she spits out a baby at 14 or 15 just because her body's capable of it. Well, that also includes if she starts banging at 14 or 15, greatly decreases her chances of having, the relationship she would want when she's ready to settle down. It starts her off early on a pathway of banging through dudes and experiences, each one adding up to a hindrance for her to settle down in a monogamous or semi-monogamous scenario later on and finding happiness there. So we need to, and think about it. Young girls can think about this. Most young girls, is their first sexual experience a great one that they can sort of be happy about? That was like a dream experience for them. And even if it was not so bad for them, what about when that broke up and the next experience and the next experience? And what kind of emotional turmoil did that 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old girl go through during those time frames that added up to her carrying baggage and problems into her adult life and into how she is framed herself to treat men and to think of herself and her self-esteem and understanding her value and all of those things? Where's the benefit been for a girl to lose her V card prior to high school ending? Has there been any benefit at all? Not in modern times. No fucking way. And so girls are banging way too early. And, you guys can't bitch about notch counts and then not state this fact, right? Not state this as being true and not being wanting or willing to talk about it and protect these young girls from being sexually active before their brains are developed enough for them to handle it and be mature enough. All right. So, what age is too young? All right, the prefrontal cortex in a woman continues to develop, past the age of 16. Just because she, the age of consent everywhere is 16, her prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. It might not even, it's about half, maybe not even that at 16. And it doesn't stop developing. And when she's 18 and out of high school. And in fact, it continues to develop. Her prefrontal cortex doesn't reach full development until she is 21 years old. So a girl who's 18 years old that you guys think you should be able to hook up with is not emotionally ready for that hookup and won't be for at least a couple more years. Now, there are some girls who may mature a lot sooner. Maybe they're ready at 19 and a half or 20 or something like that. And some might need all the way to 21 or even closer to even a little older than that for some outliers. But for the most part, you can count on a girl under 18 not being emotionally ready for a sexual relationship, period. And if she is in one and it happens to be an older dude past the 5-year mark where his maturity level and level of power creates a differential, it's even that much more damaging to that young girl. All right. So now, what does the prefrontal cortex do? It's implicated in executive functions such as planning, decision-making, working memory, personality expressions, moderating social behaviors, controlling certain aspects of speech and language. A young girl who's not yet mature in her prefrontal cortex is compromised when it comes to differentiating between good and bad or better and best. She's compromised when it comes to future planning, telling her that, banging this, hot 25-year-old that can get you in, or the hot 30-year-old that can get you into parties, when you're 19, and get you to, drink and have a fake ID, or, the 40-year-old that gets you on the boat, with some celebrity status or whatever, when you're 18, 19, telling a girl not to bang that guy because she's going to ruin her future chances of having a good relationship, in a healthy relationship later. It's not going to process well for her. She's not seeing consequences down the line, and there's no the ability to, have delayed gratification, meaning to stave off from doing something so you get the gratification later. That ability is not there with somebody as well when their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. All right. She is hindered in seeing future consequences. She is hindered from understanding how her current behavior is going to, predict negative outcomes for her. And she's also has less emotional self-control, and she has less of an understanding of her social and logistical ramifications of her actions. Right? Both guys and girls of that age. All right. So she may be sexually developed, may look hot, but like her mind isn't developed enough to handle a sexual relationship with anyone, particularly an older guy. All right. That's what the science shows. And, you don't need, you want to know the study? Just hit your Google machine, dude. Hit the Google button, and it tells you when the brain stops developing the prefrontal cortex and what that controls. That's like basic knowledge. There's no special. I'll include studies when it's like specialized knowledge that, like, oh, this groundbreaking literature shows this shit. No, just fucking Google it, because it's out there in basic knowledge. The brain is not done developing in the prefrontal cortex for a young girl until somewhere between and around the age of 21. And some say later. Some even say later, but I disagree with that data, though, to be honest. It seems to be, that, because the brain is always has neuroplasticity, so the brain is always able to change. Okay, you wouldn't be able to learn anything new if that weren't the case. However, in terms of actual development, like brain matter and growth and solidifying certain connections, okay, like that happens and grows as a kid and peaks at an adult, and then it stops at a certain point, and then you have your brain, and now it's your brain making different neural connections and stuff like that. It's not in neuroplasticity. You're not growing necessarily, more matter and stuff. And a guy's brain grows for longer. Guys tend to be more immature earlier, but then the theory is they surpass that maturity level, and you have different brain growth in other areas that take longer to grow, actually, because there's like areas where, men tend to excel in mathematics and, spatial thinking and other things. Those can take longer to develop. And so that's where that, guys, they figure is 25 for their brain growth. But yeah, in terms of the executive function for a girl, it's 21. So, the age of consent might be 18, but does that mean she should be banging then? Maybe not, right? Maybe not. Does that mean if you're, an older dude, you should be sniping and hunting for the 18-year-old so you can catch her as a virgin? I don't think that's a great idea, unless are you planning on marrying her? Are you in a culture where she's going to be, handed off to you by the family, and then she's going to be in a marriage with you for the rest of her life? Is that the situation? Because if you're in the modern dating market, that's probably, it's not really an ethical thing to do now, is it? And so just because a girl again, may be old enough physically. That doesn't mean that she is old enough mentally. All right. Now, does that mean though we got to bring up this thing? Because people be like, well, so does, because everyone's binary thinking and nobody knows how to think anymore. So I'll help you with that. All right, and I'm not talking about my listeners. If you're smart, okay, I'm not talking to you. If you're dumbass, I guess I am talking to you. But okay, it's like, does that mean that a woman doesn't have any agency? Like an 18-year-old, if she's not mature enough to have sex, does that mean she's absolved of all agency and decision making? Well, the answer to that is no. Okay, so and I'll use I'll use a couple of analogies, but an 18-year-old can be too immature because of brain development to handle the consequences of a sexual relationship, but mature enough to understand that she's too immature and to say no. Okay. So when we're talking about brain development, it does get a little tricky because as people age, because it's not like we can just scan someone's brain and go, oh, you are mature enough to do these things and not mature enough to do these things. We kind of just have to go based on what we can assess with their behavior, but since everyone is so triggered by this topic, they're not objective, right? Like, the guy who's, let's say 10, 15 years older has an 18-year-old girl who's smoking, who's an sexual option for him and she's hot. He's going to rationalize how great and smart and mature she is so he can bang her, rationalize that to himself, but he's of course wrong, right? Probably. And so we don't have objectivity here because most of you guys can't set aside your hindbrain for a minute and use your frontal lobe. You're just not able to do that. And so most guys in these situations don't do that, and most women, they don't do that either. So reality is though, there's different ages for different functions. So in other words, like an 18-year-old might be old enough to get a job, okay, but might be too reckless in their decision making to make responsible decisions with alcohol. That's the legal argument, or basis the legal argument for the legal age of drinking to be 21. And it's a brain development thing. It's that we know that 18-year-olds are compromised when it comes to making decisions, and you throw in alcohol, that's problematic. Okay. And so, but an 18-year-old can still work a job though. The rental car industries understand this. This is why they won't rent under 25. It's too much of a risk. Is it fair? Probably not, but they see it as a risk. You know what I mean? Insurance too. They're looking at these risk categories. So when it's profitable, people look at the brain science, but when it's not profitable, people tend to ignore it and want to push these consensual ages, right? Understand that if women are less capable of relationships and there's more breakups, divorces, and all that, that's better for a, consumer-based economy. So the narrative isn't to try to keep people together and into happy relationships. Happy people in happy relationships don't waste their money. Okay. So understand that the counter narratives are all there for a reason. All right. And so, but there are different ages for different functions. And so I don't know what the law or age of consent should be. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not really sure the answer to that. I'm not really sure where we should place the law in terms of statutory rape, because reality is maybe a certain 19 or 20-year-old girl, maybe she is developed enough, even if her brain's not quite done yet, but developed enough to get into a sexual relationship with an older guy. Whereas the girl, her friend who's the same age, is not mature enough yet. Like, what's the difference? We don't know, right? From a legal perspective to start prosecuting people. So I don't know the legal answer, but, we can tell, for example, though, there is still agency. Like I can tell a 14-year-old kid, a 14-year-old kid can understand that alcohol and marijuana, maybe in moderation for an adult, is going to be not that damaging, right? But to a child's brain can be considerably damaging, which is why, you're not supposed to drink or smoke weed when you're under a certain age of brain development. You can tell that to a 14-year-old. The 14-year-old can understand that, even though he's not, from a brain perspective, mature enough to handle smoking weed or drinking alcohol responsibly, or the consequences of what that's going to do. Do you know what I mean? To the side effects of those drugs. And we are dealing with side effects to your brain with sexual behavior. Okay. We can't sit here and talk about your brain on porn or your brain on this and then not recognize that when women have sex, it changes their brain. We can't get away from those things. Okay. And so, the bottom line is I'm all for, again, my girlfriend's hot in her 20s, right? I'm a 20-year difference. I'm all for age gap relationships when they're responsible and they benefit both parties. They're not predatory. But we start to get into age of consent. My suggestion to you, here's my rule, and I suggest you adopt it, is that unless you're within 5 years, don't date below the age of 21. Don't bang below the age of 21. Okay. So if the girl's 18 and you're 21, 22, sure. If you're 30, don't do it. Now, am I going to judge you super hard or whatever? Well, not necessarily, because I know that society disagrees with what I'm saying. I know that many of you are going to disagree with what I'm saying, even though you're not thinking logically and it doesn't wash with the science. And you're also wrong. You guys are fucking wrong all the time. All right. Like I know, and I know what I'm doing. Okay. And so, you can just listen to me because it's not that hard of an argument. This is not even a hard argument to follow. That's what's funny about this one. And this is how you're capping based on hindbrain drives and existential threats, when the argument is so easy to follow that it's not like I have to pull a lot of research and evidence to demonstrate it. It's super easy. It's well-known facts. The prefrontal cortex is still developing up until the age 21. If you want to be safe and be sure that you're not damaging a girl and imprinting her in a way that's going to affect her for the rest of her life in a damaging way, then don't fuck her until she's 21 or older. It's like a simple math problem, but guys are going to argue that point. I know you're going to. It's funny to me. So that's the unpopular opinion. That's not what the red pill manosphere dudes are saying, but that's what I'm saying because I know I'm right, because it's what the brain science is. Now, again, if you're in 5 years, within that 5-year range, well, your brain's still developing too as a guy. There's less of a power differential there. And so that's a little bit more sensible. And so if you're within that range, you want to look at maturity traits because, again, we can't scan her brain. All right. And this is general things too. Like even if you're 40 years old, hooking up with a 21-year-old, if you want something more than just a hookup, all right, which by the way, most girls under 25 are not relationship capable yet. I've talked about that in other videos. Okay. So under 25, they're usually not there. Are there exceptions to that? Absolutely exceptions. But you guys are going to make exceptions because you want to bang her and justify that it's more than just you wanting to bang her. I'm urging you just to be honest with yourselves. Okay. If you're messing around with a 22-year-old who hasn't figured her life out yet, the prognosis for a relationship success isn't real high because she's going to figure out herself a lot differently between age 22 and 30. She's going to make a lot of changes, and those changes may not involve you. You know what I mean? And so there are substantial risks for long-term success when you're under 25, regardless of your age as a man, right? When the girl's under 25, just because we're in the global sexual marketplace and people live longer and people make more changes. A girl from age, 20 to 24 is going to change a lot more than a girl from the age of 27 to 31. Like the changes a girl makes in that time frame when she's younger astronomically can change who she fundamentally is. And so the person you met at 21 may not even be really the same person by the time she turns 25, 26. And so if you've already knocked out kids with her or and tried to have this relationship life with her, your prognosis isn't good for success. Her chances of her being unsatisfied, feeling like she missed out, right? In the global sexual marketplace, those things are really, really high. Are there exceptions? Absolutely exceptions. But you guys are probably not it. Don't assume that you're the exception because you're probably not. Okay. So now, what traits though are we looking for a more mature girl? Let's say you're a guy who's listening to this show right now. You're within 5 years of some 19-year-old girl. Let's say, what traits are we looking at for? Is she's going to be a good, viable maybe partner for something where it's not like some damaging scenario? Well, is she able to delay gratification? That's the first thing you want to look at. Okay. The ability to delay gratification is a measure of both intelligence and maturity. Women who are not, and men too, people who are not fully developed in their executive functions will not be able to delay gratification that easily. And so, and a lot of adults who are supposedly fully developed are also can't delay gratification. So that is a demonstration of a lot of things and your success prognosis, the ability to delay gratification. If a girl demonstrates that ability, okay, then that's a pretty good sign that there's some maturity there, right? Is she emotionally self-controlled, or is she really circumstantial in how her emotions are? And it's funny, a lot of these traits, I know some adult women aren't going to have them, which should, these should be red flags in all your relationships. But, you know, especially true if you're like at the edge of, do I mess around with this 19-year-old girl? She's hot. I got this opportunity. Do I mess around with her as a guy who's older? I'm afraid that I'm going to damage her. What's the answer here, right? Look for these traits and don't lie to yourself about them. Is she independent of her friends and peers, or is she into groupthink? That's a big sign right there too. Younger girls and teenagers and, early like 19, 20, 21-year olds, they are very motivated by their peers. Women in general are motivated by the social environment they're in and their friends, but a sign of maturity is how motivated. When a girl can't deviate from her friend group, that's not a sign of maturity. She's probably not ready for a serious sexual relationship. Can she communicate on somewhat of an emotional equal footing? No, men and women are not equal. That's not the implication. We communicate differently. Okay. They're not something you can measure by equality or not equality. However, in an attempt to communicate, can she come to the table with the level of emotional control in order to have a healthy communication with you when there's stress and conflict? Or is she going to default to toxic communication patterns because she's not mature enough to handle a healthy conversation? That's another thing. Is she firm in her identity, or is she into a group identity? So here's an example. The 18-year-old that you guys think is so evolved and mature because she's still a virgin and she's all about her church. Well, guess what? She's in a group identity, which is her church. Now, that group identity of her religion and her church might be saving her for problems later in life. That's a good argument to make, but we can't make the argument that she's mature. There's a big difference between a 30-year-old, okay, who is involved with her church and has her own identity, and an 18-year-old who is completely indoctrinated in her group identity. You see what I'm saying? Those things they look real different. And that's a sign of immaturity if she has to default her identity to a group identity, whatever group that is. Could be her religion, could be being a cheerleader, could be being in her friend group, it could be being a stoner, could be being in her family, right? But that differentiation hasn't happened yet. She's not mature. Okay. Is she, because her identity isn't firm and isn't mature, that makes her more moldable. A lot of guys like this. This is what makes a lot of guys want to go for younger girls when they specifically target younger women. I don't suggest that you specifically target younger women. I suggest that you just date women that are attractive and that you like. And if that plants you in a lower age category, then so be it, you know. But again, I would be very cautious to a no, depending on your age, of going under 21, right? Because you're risking damaging of another person, all right? And how about personal accountability? I know a lot of women don't have personal accountability in general. Same with guys for that matter, all right? But women, young girls are going to have a real compromised ability there a lot of times, unless they were raised really, really well. It takes a mature person, you know, to have that. And so those are some things that I've listed there. If you're within, like, if you're a 23, 24-year-old guy listening to me, you know, looking at dating a, you know, a 20-year-old or a 19-year-old, you know, that's probably okay. The power differential isn't so much higher, but is she displaying these characteristics? If she's not displaying these characteristics, she's probably not ready to be having any sexual relationships at all. If a girl held off till she was 21, think about her prognosis for success in the sexual marketplace. If a girl was hot, you know, attractive, took care of herself, had good values, and didn't have the baggage, the emotional baggage, because she didn't have sex until she just was 21 or around then. And it was in the context of maybe a relationship. Imagine where that girl might be at. You know what I'm saying? Imagine her probability of success so much higher. And so we need to be repeating this because, you know, you guys want the sexual marketplace to change. You got to be willing to say the messages that might not serve you. You know, you might have to say no or turn down or, you know, potentially not go for some 19-year-old that wants to bang you because she's too immature for that, right? And because you understand from a values perspective, it's not good or whatever. And, you know, instead of promoting for that 19-year-old to just go on hoe phase weekends for the next, you know, year, right? So you can get laid. It would be nice if we put a narrative out there that helped girls, young girls, be more successful in their relationships. And why, as a guy, should you care about that? Because if you want to be successful in your relationships with women, you got to have more options of women who aren't broken and damaged by the current narrative that's out there, right? And so, like, it may be too late for you in terms of generationally, but for at least the next generation, if there's a fundamental understanding that there's a lot to be said for waiting before getting railed out, right? That is going to help them. I mean, I don't know any girl who wouldn't be better off from having just like reversed every sexual experience they had up until at least 21. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Most girls would be much better if they just pretended that didn't happen, you know, and most girls will want to pretend that didn't happen because that's how it goes. You know, they're not mature enough to handle it. When I say handle it, I mean, make good decisions, even about the sexual situations they should be in. You know what I mean? And so now here's the thing. You guys, as a responsibility, you have a responsibility here. The more attractive you are to women in general and to younger women, the more of a responsibility you have. There is a misconception here that girls who are younger don't want these dirty old men. Yeah, girls who are younger don't want unattractive older men, which is most of you guys that are older. No offense. Most of you guys who are past the age of 35, past the age of 40, you know, 45, 50-year-olds are most of you guys are unattractive to most 21-year-olds, 23-year-olds, right? That's a fact. You're not attracting those girls, most of you guys, okay? But I say most of you guys. I don't know about my listeners necessarily, but generally out there. So when a girl says, ew, I don't want an old man, she's thinking of the unattractive older guys. The reality is there's a lot of exceptions. Okay. When a guy is attractive and he checks all the blocks, a girl sees, and this has been a study, research shows 58%, okay, are open to relationships 10 plus years into 20 plus years, age gaps, differences. Most girls, so almost 60% of women, without a guy in front of them, will tell you. So that means that a 22-year-old, right, that's good looking, a 21-year-old, she is open to being with a guy who is 10, 15, or 20 years older than she is, provide, because she doesn't care about the age. That's the reality of it. Now the social repercussions make a girl say differently in those situations. But when put to research, 60% would go with an older guy if the guy checks all the blocks. So, and I got news for you. As a guy, even at my age, okay, I've had girls 18, 19 years old, and as, soon as this, like within the past year, you know, want to get in my orbit when I'm in the gym or when I'm in certain places because I project attraction and value as a guy. And so girls will go for older guys to a degree, not just 1 to 3, or, as they end up in relationships and prefer those. Like when asked, well, what age would you prefer? A girl usually will say she prefers like 3 or, 3 up to 5 years older or something like that. That's the wrong question. It's what do they do? What actions? When a guy is attractive, the age tends to not matter as much. She'll hook up with the guy. Why? Because the guy's age represents a guy that's good looking, attractive, and masculine represents, not just an ability to show her and for her to have experiences that she can't have with guys her own age. So that's resources, but it's not just resources. And here's the dark secret about it. Girls hook up with dudes who are older because of sex. Okay. That's the thing that nobody wants to say. Everyone wants to think that it's that the 23-year-old who hooks up with a 45-year-old, that she's doing it because, she wants access to his money or, his resources or his cool car. No, she wants, that may be some of the thing that comes with the territory, but it's the sex. I promise you. She's hoping when the guy signals masculine dominance that she's going to have a better sexual experience with this older, more masculine guy who has more sexual experience than she is going to with these younger options. And so she will, then options her own age. And so she'll go with that guy, maybe keep him a secret, maybe be his sex buddy, like be a F buddy, right? Maybe have a casual sexual fling with the older guy. Why? Because he's sexually experienced. He's going to show her better sexual time. Okay. That's the secret. That's why they go for older dudes. It's sex. It's not just money, guys. But it's only when the guy is attractive, is masculine, is in good shape, has good resources, which is part of being that alpha male archetype. When he has that alpha male archetype, the younger girls go for him. All right. That's when that happens. Most guys don't fit that. Most guys posturing on the internet and talking about these topics, they're not that guy. Okay. So that's the reality of it. Now, that all being said, then, well, if you're an attractive guy and you're, let's say, in your late 30s or late 40s, even, you got some like 18, 19-year-old like checking you out and trying to get in your orbit, trying to talk to you or whatever, you kind of have a responsibility here, because you're not going to be in some relationship with this girl. But if you allow it to go into a sexual dynamic, and the younger the girl is, the more risky this is. You risk creating this power differential. Like, I know if I have sex with some 18-year-old girl and she's like, sees me as attractive, assuming that block is checked, she's going to have a time and there's going to be such a power difference between me and that 18-year-old that like I'm screwing her up potentially for her life. She is possibly going to be alpha widowed forever. A lot of guys who are, in my opinion, it's a real douchebag scarcity mindset, but a lot of guys think like, oh, they want to alpha widow all these girls. Like, really? Do you? Do you want to alpha? You want to ruin a girl's possible probability of having healthy relationship in the future? That's what you want? Like, you know, I know I've done this in the past. I have quite a past. I'm not happy about that. I'm not proud of ruining a girl's chances for her to have success and happiness later. And I didn't do that, by the way, with young girls who were too young. Just get that out of the way. Even girls who were just, normal consensual age, right? Like I know for a fact that they had struggles after me, and some of them still do, and I don't like it. It's not something I'm proud of, but it is something that just happens. And, it happens as a consequence of sexual relationships and adults consenting to sex. It happens where somebody can get hung up on another person. And that's just a consequence of what it is. And it's her consequence to deal with, and unfortunately that's just how it is, right? Like I can't, do anything much about that. All right. But certainly I can do something about permanently damaging a girl who's too young in her brain development. And with great power comes responsibility. If you are if you are the attractive guy who can get the girls who are under 21 to want to hook up with you, or if you're the guy who's going to offer resources and this, that, and the other to try to get this 18, 19-year-old on your boat or as your arm candy or wherever, and you're banging these girls, if you have an inkling of idea of what you're doing in the bedroom, you could be damaging these girls. And I think that that's something that we need to be aware of, man. And we need to not do that, because again, great power comes responsibility. And those are decisions you're going to have to live with, and that makes you predatory. The predatory statements are true if you're sniping after girls who are really too immature in their brain development to handle the sexual dynamic. And especially if you're doing that specifically to hopefully catch them before other guys get to them, kind of a thing, in order to imprint them, that's probably a predatory thing. That sounds real predatory to me. And I don't advocate that at all. So now the last thing then, so what about age gap relationships when the girl is brain development? What about when she's 22 and she's banging a 40-year-old? Or how about a 50, how about she's 22, she's banging a 50-year-old or an 85-year-old of sound mind? Is that okay? Is that ethical? Well, I would say that she is an adult at that point and that you can't take her agency away. When she's 22, 23 years old, and like, look at this circumstance where everyone loses their mind. What was the Al Pacino, right? So Al Pacino and his girlfriend, right? So let's see, where's our photo of Al Pacino and his girlfriend, right? Let's go look at images. All right, so we got this little photo up. Let me trying to open up. All right, so I'm going to do a quick share for those of you who haven't seen it. All right. Share screen. Okay. Al Pacino's girlfriend, 8 months pregnant. Okay, so what are we looking at here? TMZ article. You can see Al Pacino here. You can see his much younger and more attractive girlfriend. And people, of course, are all up in arms. He is an 83-year-old and Nor is 29 years old. Okay. And oh my goodness, this is so terrible, right? And so we'll stop. So you got a good look at those two. Stop sharing it. Now go back to my StreamYard. So like, what about that? Well, I would say that that's none of your fucking business. The girl is 29 years old. If she wants to bang 82-year-old Al Pacino, that is her prerogative. She doesn't need to be shamed for that decision. He doesn't need to be told he's some sort of predator. He's a dude who wants a hotter girl. There's nothing wrong with him wanting the hot girl. With regardless of what age she is, there would be something wrong though if it was a predatory dynamic where her brain was not adult enough yet. But at 29, her brain is an adult brain. She has agency. She has decisions. She has consensually decided that being with 83-year-old or 82-year-old Al Pacino is good for her for whatever reason. She decided that. Could be just money, probably just money. We could try to assume that. But dude, I'm not in their relationship. I have no idea. Could be status. Could be maybe she really likes the dude. I don't know. Maybe he's like super good in the bedroom and we don't even know about that. Like, I mean, we don't know, man. We don't know. TMZ doesn't know. You don't know. I don't know. But I do know it's none of our fucking business. I do know that. Like, we can talk about it a little bit here and there because they're public figures and that's fine. But it's really nothing for us. Like, that is up to them and what they do, what they decide. What we can't do now is accuse him of being a predator or her of being a victim. Some might want to accuse her of being the predator because she got knocked up and, now she has access to his resources, right? Maybe if that was the intention, maybe that was predatory, but not necessarily though. We don't know that till we know more details. You can't automatically assume that one person or the other is a predator and a bad when both are consenting adults, just because there's an age gap. The girl is 22 and her brain is fully developed and she hooks up with a 50-year-old man and she's doing it consensually. Guess what? Her business. She is an adult. She has agency. She has personal responsibility, and not granting her that responsibility is being disrespectful to women, is being disrespectful to that girl's choices. My girl, she is 25 years old and she is with me. I'm 45 years old. She is an adult female. I get losers and assholes all the time. Guys who clearly do not do well and women who clearly do not do well in their relationships and dating lives, having something to say about my relationship. This girl couldn't be happier. I'm happy as well. It's none of anyone's business, you see, because she is an adult female making her decisions. There's nothing predatory about the relationship, nothing like that. I promise you, in every category, she's pretty happy, and that's where the buck sort of stops. And so a lot of unpopular opinions here. Some of them will be popular with my audience. Some of them not popular with my audience. I know a lot of you guys don't want to hear that you can't go bang girls under 21 if you're 30 years old, that's probably unethical. I know you don't want to hear that, but that is what the science tells us. That's what the objective reality tells us. If you do go under that, use the guidelines I said to try to determine if she's mature, but you're probably not doing the right thing, and if you're specifically targeting women under 21, I'm going to suggest that you don't do that. I think that's a bit predatory. And in fact, as you approach the dating marketplace, I suggest that you just target women that are beautiful, that you think that you would have a good time with, and that you would have good experiences with. That's really where you want to just set your sights. And that could be women of really any age category. There's plenty of women who are 40 years old, who take care of themselves, who are just as fun to hang around with, and that sometimes more fun, have more to offer than some 25-year-old that maybe you could get. You know what I'm saying? And so it's this idea of, this ageism and stuff. My suggestion is that you abandon that shit and just stick with actually dating women. Like, all you guys who get into this theory stuff aren't actually getting out there. You're not actually dating girls. You're just into a theory. You're into theories. You like to mentally jerk yourselves off, but you're not actually getting out there. Get out there and date women. Date women who are your age, date women who are younger, date women who are older. See what it's like. Who cares? Have good experiences, develop good relationships. Whatever your goals are, go for those. And as far as age is concerned, I would just think that as long as she's a consenting adult and of full brain development, you're probably safe, and try it out. And if you're a guy who's attractive and who has a lot to offer a chick, right? Even if you're 45, 50, 55 years old, your options are not closed to girls in their 20s. But I don't recommend you target them. I recommend that you just hang out with girls that you meet up with and hit it off with and have a good time. If that's your mindset, what's interesting is you'll be focused more on the person and who that person is rather than their stats. And you're just going to have a better time. And you're going to approach the sexual marketplace with a lot less scarcity. Guys who are older, who idealize some really pretty girl in her 20s, a lot less likely to get her anyways. You've put that girl already when you're hunting for younger girls, you're putting those girls on some sort of pedestal as if they're inherently better than other women. Now, by statistical probability, more 25-year-old women are going to be more attractive than 45-year-old women, right? We know that by statistical probability, but that doesn't mean that human beings and individuals are statistics. They're not. They're individual. And so when you're approaching the dating marketplace, take people as individuals. That's my advice to you. Because then when you meet that hot 25-year-old, if that's what happens, you're not putting her on some pedestal way above everybody because she's so pretty. You know, she may have a lot of in making you unobjective and having you miss red flags, miss problems, right? And get yourself into a problem relationship as a guy just because she's pretty and younger. That's not a good idea. You know, take each girl for her value, for what she brings, right? Age is a part of that, but it's not a determining factor. So that is my advice and where that line should go for you. But, you know, I would be very, very careful and be ill-advised going under 21. And if you do make that decision, and I have friends of mine, close friends, who do make that decision all the time. Now, those guys aren't usually in their 40s and 50s. Those guys are, I have friends that I consider close that are in their late 20s, you know, early 30s, who go under 21 a lot. Okay. They have girlfriends or girls that they're seeing that are 19 and 20 and stuff like that. I see that a lot, especially in other countries where the drinking age is not 21, it's lower. Okay. So it's places in Europe where the drinking age is 18, you know, so 18, 19-year-old girls can get into bars and stuff like that. That's where you see that more often. I'm going to recommend that you guys didn't, or that you guys use some discretion when you do that and take serious consideration of her maturity level if she's under 21. And really, even as a better guideline, is just not to go under that age. I mean, that's an easy guideline. And so that would be a good guideline for you to make sure that you're building good relationships for yourself and good and making good ethical choices. My boy Glenn, what's up, Glenn? Ruth and Boaz had a 40-year gap in the Bible, and she was blessed. Well, she was definitely blessed. Now, again, in these biblical relationships and biblical times, people were a lot younger that they hooked up, but understand though that, you know, there's a whole different environment and set of goals that existed back then too. You know what I mean? But age gaps with consenting adults, I think that worrying about that is a bit ridiculous. All right. I think what we need to do is we need, though, to promote a different narrative, which is women holding off on having sex in general when they're in their teens. That would be a better thing to promote. Once again, if a girl didn't have sex until she was 21 years old or older, and in the context of a relationship, when she finally decided it, how much better would that girl be off? How much better off would she be? way better off. She would be seen by the sexual marketplace as much more valuable. She'd be valued by guys more. You know what I mean? And she by good, like, guys who are good options, and she would have a lot more options, you know? No, yeah, I'm not holding back. I didn't hold back on this one at all. Oh, yes. You're saying people when you mean men. I decided to do a drinking game where every time you say people, I take a shot. Yeah, well, good for you. You'll get nice and drunk then. Trying to be, it depends. Sometimes, being more inclusive is a good thing. Western countries, what is this one? Western countries stigmatize the so-called age gap. Most all other country societies have no issues with it. Yeah, yep, but they're wrong. I mean, sorry, man. I don't care. You're gonna Western, other countries don't do that, dude. Like, other countries handle the sexual marketplace a lot differently, and they're running into problems now because the technology and the global aspect of the global sexual marketplace is infiltrating these places where girls were classically getting married off very young. Places in Africa, places in the Mid East, places in Asia. You know what I mean? You have now westernized culture through the internet, through technology, infiltrating these cultures, making it very problematic. What you had was a set of rules that women today in westernized cultures would consider misogynistic rules placed on women. In Afghanistan, for example, women get married off younger there, right? For sure. And there's multiple wives, but there's a huge set of rules on those women too under Sharia law that most of you guys would consider, men and women from the West would consider misogynist or bad or problematic and violating the woman's rights. So what's the trade-off? You understand that, yeah, a girl in Afghanistan can get, what is the age of consent in Afghanistan? Actually, the see, a girl can get married. Girl can only have sex in Afghanistan when she's married. That's the rule. Okay. So there's the rule. I know that age of girl can get married Afghanistan. Let's look that up because I'm not actually sure what that is. um, so minimum age for girls to get married is like, 15. It looks like. Child marriages are illegal, but they are widespread. So, well, and that's another thing about Afghanistan is they don't do necessarily what's legal. Exactly. They're their little different little towns and little areas don't necessarily obey what the other laws are. But at any rate, and I don't know, who knows, they're owned by the Taliban now. Who knows the hell is going on over there now? But you know, it's like this is funny. I'm sorry. A lot of my advice only works if you have access to a fat bar. Yes. You're referring to weightlifting. Thank you. But at any rate, like, yeah, so in Afghanistan, sure, let's say there's child marriages, which, I mean, that's technically illegal, but the marital age in Afghanistan is like 15. Well, it says 15 or 16, but 15 to 16. So girls can get married way before their brains developed, sure, and then have sex and have babies. But guess what? They're also property of their husbands via Sharia law. So you want girls to start having sex sooner, having babies. Then they get to be property of their husbands too. And they get to be under Sharia law then. They get to have a bunch of rules set on them so they can't go off and make bad decisions for themselves. Right? That's a male driven society based on these old, ways of thinking. If that's what you want, okay, that's what you get. You don't get to pick, you don't get to pick and choose. All right. And so the problem is, it's like people will use these examples and go, oh, well, women are, getting married, sexually active when they're 15, 16 in these places like Afghanistan. So I don't know what I'm talking about. This is a problem with the people in the West. No, no. And they're saying that because they want to apply Western rules to standards from a place like Afghanistan. That doesn't work. Sorry, bro. Doesn't work. Okay. If we're going to have girls having families and shit before their brains develop, then they get to be treated like children under Sharia law because they technically are. Girl is 15, is technically still a child in her brain, in her frontal lobe. She's still not fully developed yet. Okay. So if we're going to knock her up with a kid, well, then she has to have protection of a husband where the husband has a responsibility to her and to whatever children come out of her to protect and to provide where she doesn't work and he provides all the stuff. And then she's under strict rules based on Sharia law from whatever that dude says. I mean, that's how that works. Understand. And going back to hunter-gatherer tribes, yes, women got pregnant, knocked up earlier, but guess what? Males ran that tribe. They decided who was banging who and who's having whose kids, and those girls were under some rules. They weren't just allowed to go leave the tribe and go bang other people necessarily without massive repercussions. So you don't get to pick and choose. You don't get to have a westernized free world where women have free choices and then have them making free choices that are going to harm them as children. They had rules in place to prevent them from harming themselves, right? Whether those are ethical or good or not isn't the point, all right? That's what prevented women from harming themselves, which made those societies work. We don't have that nowadays. Now, should we? Shouldn't we? I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's practical to think we're ever going to go backwards into the rest of the world being like a Middle Eastern nation or some of these other places that handle marriage differently. I don't think the rest of the world's going to do that. There is no stopping the westernization that's happening. So what we can do is act like we live in reality instead of acting like we're in fantasy role-playing games like you guys, some of you guys on the internet, and actually fucking look at what reality is. Reality is that women have choices. The laws are what they are. Okay. They have free will and free choices going into teenage years. So we need to start teaching and training what that means and what that looks like and using science to do it because that's what's going to help them have the best prognosis. We're not, girls aren't going to all of a sudden turn around and be handed off from her family to a guy who technically owns her when she's 15 to go, when she's 14 to start having babies when she's 15. That isn't how it's going to work here in the West. We're not ever going back to that, right? Like it's not how it's happening. And other countries are not turning more into that. They're going away from that. So we need to start having a different narrative and a different way that we understand the sexual marketplace and how we teach women to handle themselves because they don't have, biblical law or Sharia law or whatever, these types of rules placed on them when it comes to their decisions. They're free to make their own decisions. So instead of promoting, sexual access and whatever, and trying to like navigate this thing where you guys are promoting teens to bang each other, but, and explore their sexuality, but not really understanding the neurological consequences of that. No, like we need to actually start thinking about how we're approaching this and using the damn science. And the science shows that there's an issue with that. A girl being sexually active too young, unless she's under a ton of rules like that in a totally different society, which is going to change her outcomes. If she is sexually active when she's really young, has that power dynamic, and isn't going to be with that partner when she's older, that her partners are going to change and flow as she ages, and she's going to have a series of partners, and some of those partners may be older with a power dynamic. That girl's prognosis for success is not good. She is not going to be a mateable, dateable option, a good option, but when she's 23 or 20, 29, whichever, when she's ready to settle down, she's not going to be, she's going to be the things that all the traits you guys bitch about, and I do too, about women not being good partners to men. That's what she's going to be when she starts early. That's what we've been doing. Understand, women have been promoting it more than anybody. Like, moms are having these conversations with their daughters and not telling them, hey, don't fucking tell like you're 21. And if you do, when you do, and if you do, be in a relationship, don't be like just whoring around. They don't have that conversation. Most moms, they're trying to be open and cool. They're taking them on vacations to go get laid. They're like doing cool mom stuff nowadays. This is the shit that women are doing. And then what happens, dude? They're turning around, and they're just absolutely atrocious to be with. They don't respect themselves. They don't respect their bodies, which is why they get fat. They don't respect their femininity, which is why they're unpleasant to fucking be around. You know what I mean? Like, this is what happens. And it all starts because mom or dad wasn't around, and mom's like, let's go on vacation where you had your first sex with a boy. Oh, tell me about it at 15. You know what I mean? Well, he's cute, even though he's 20. Like, this is the bullshit that the cool moms are doing nowadays. And these girls are fucking ruined by the time they get in their mid-20s. So unless you put Sharia law back, don't fucking tell me about banging 16-year-olds. All right? Don't tell me about banging 15-year-olds. Let's talk more about having an environment and a chance for women to be actually good partners when they get older. Having these girls grow up to have a prognosis of potential success. And again, if you're a girl who's listening to me, who followed the narrative that everyone taught you, and you banged in high school, and you had a few partners, and you went through your whole phase, it's not hopeless for you. That's not the message, okay? But you are going to have some shit to deal with now. And that shit is going to land on your future partner's lap to deal with too. And that's pretty unfair, but it is the way of the world. You're going to have things to deal with now that you shouldn't have to deal with. And you would have been much better off had this advice been what you had access to, And so don't go forward if you're a girl or a woman, okay, who had this experience. Don't take it personally and get mad at me and try to justify your own sexual value. Just recognize, look, I'm right. And so this is why you need to train and teach your daughters, your nieces, other women, that are young girls growing up. Hey, you know what? Just wait. Don't do what your friends are doing. Don't fall into the trap. Just wait until you're a little bit older. Your brain will be developed more, and get it in the context of some kind of a healthy relationship dynamic. Have your first time be a good experience. And if it's not the only guy you've ever, if it's not your forever time, meaning this guy is the guy you're going to be with forever, right? At least it's a good one. At least it's healthy. At least you have healthy attachment abilities. At least you have healthy ways to communicate with the opposite sex. At least you are not so fucking, degraded in how you see yourself as where you see yourself only as some sexual object, or see yourself, you've degraded yourself based on what women have told you and how men have treated you, not just one or the other. Now you're just like not taking care of your body. Now you're doing drugs and alcohol, self-medicating, getting fat, and then trying to have happiness and making some guy who doesn't know any better miserable when you're like 30. Like, fucking stop it. Can we like put a tourniquet on this right now? All right. The easiest way to put a tourniquet on this shit is to fucking stop banging girls under 21 and stop promoting for girls to go bang who are under 21. That is the quickest fucking way. Unless we're doing Sharia law again, I'm waiting for that to happen. But, since that's not happening and I'm not even promoting for that to happen, to be real, let's start taking this a little more objectively. And let's start not just protecting our women, but protecting our guys too. Because you guys want good options for women. You guys sit here and say women are trashy nowadays and aren't any good options. Right. Because it's shit started when they were 14 and 15. That's why. You're trying to undo all this fucking damage from when they were teenagers. So let's start talking about things differently. All right. Stop justifying your own bullshit. Stop ego protecting. Let's start being objective, because by protecting these young girls who are my friends' daughters, okay, my friends' daughters and people that my nieces, protecting them by giving them a different narrative of what the nasty westernized narrative is. We can give them a different narrative about protecting themselves and seeing themselves as more valuable, and understanding that their sexual value is predicated on a lot of these things, and that they're going to have urges and desires to do things that they shouldn't act on because their emotional maturity isn't there yet until they're approaching at least 21. We don't start having that narrative. These girls are susceptible to the same damage that all the girls we deal with now are susceptible to. So you guys want to start changing shit. That's how you do it. It starts with you. All right. So think about that before any of you guys, the very few of you who are going to disagree with me and run your mouths on my shit, think about that. Okay. Think about that for a minute, because if you're valuable and you work on yourself as a dude, you'll have plenty of options with women. You don't need to go with some 18-year-old, and then pump and dump her. Like, what's wrong with you? You know what I mean? You don't need to do that. You can pump and dump a 22-year-old and it's just fine. You know what I mean? If that's what you're going to do, and that's what that 22-year-old wants, she's consensual, her brain's developed. There's no victims here, but I'm thinking, I think we need to think about these things different. Right. So let's back at the comments. I'm heated today. I'm heated. All right. Let's see here. When your woman's age is less than the age gap in your relationship, is that a win? Wait, when your woman's age. Yeah. Anyway, that's funny. Wait until Rolo. Oh yeah. I don't know what his opinion is. I have no idea what his opinion is on this, to be honest. So I haven't asked him. I have no idea. I haven't watched the stream on it, so I don't know. We don't usually disagree, him and I, but we might on this. Who knows, man? Who knows? What do we got here? I got a super chat. Let's look at this one. Hey, I just asked a question in chat. It won't fit in here. Well, I guess you got to do more money, Brandon Hunter. You got to do like $10 or some shit. It does it by characters based on money. It's fine though. You don't have to do more money. I'm just kidding. Probably a dumb question. Do more women become alpha widows as a result of having a high notch count, or do they rack up their notch count trying to find a new Chad after becoming alpha widowed? Yeah, man, that's a really good question. It's not a dumb question. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to it really, because there's a lot of research and data we don't necessarily have on this. Do more women become alpha widows as a result of having a high notch count? Well, so it's not, but all right. So let me explain this dynamic a little bit. Tugboat is a dickhead. I just want to say my hamster is spinning, motherfucker. It's definitely spinning. I've sworn so much on this one. I'm sure the algorithms will still hate me. I don't care though. I don't care anymore about it. I do, but I don't. Right. So yeah. So back to this question. It's not a dumb question. It's an interesting question. So here's a couple things to understand. So notch count itself isn't what creates alpha widowing, in my opinion. Understand, I'm going to differentiate from dudes that like are red pill or whatever, because well, I have my own thoughts. I don't know. That's a weird, rare thing, but I have my own thoughts on this based on research and stuff and the way I interpret the data. And so the way I look at it is two things. It's so the alpha widowing is a peak experience. It's one person that creates that. She could have, you know, one notch, but if that notch, that guy she was with was such a peak experience that the next relationship can't outdo that relationship for her, that's alpha widowed. She's alpha widowed by that previous guy. It can only be one guy. You see, it's the guy that creates the most intense emotions for her that makes her perceive that guy as the best mating choice in her hindbrain, in her instinctual brain, in her mammalian brain, in her limbic system, where attraction and desire is, you see. And so she just won't desire, even though the guy could be a great guy and she wants to love him and she wants to feel these things for him. See it all the time. You guys have done lots of consults with women. Okay. It's not just guys. Believe it or not, my crazy ass women talk to me about stuff because they understand that I have answers for them. The ones that are smart enough to see past these social, you know, biases, right? That me as a male with my description could possibly be helpful. The ones that, you know, see past that have come to me for help, have paid for consults, and I've talked to women who are in relationships or came from relationships, were alpha widowed, didn't understand it, you know. They'll come, they're like, he's a great guy, but I just don't have I don't feel it. I don't know why. And then it's like, wow, but she felt it for an ex-boyfriend so many years ago. And that girl's notches aren't necessarily through the roof. It's just, you know, she might have like, you know, less than 10 notches. She might only have slept with a handful of guys, but one guy was such a peak experience for her, and how she experienced that relationship was so peak that it's not topping the guy that she's settled down with. Even the guy she's settling down with, and he checks all the blocks and all that stuff, checking the blocks is transactional. She doesn't have that desire for him, and she wants it, but she doesn't know how to have that. The reality is, the answer is that guy. You want to know the answer is frame. All right. So I have my year-long seduction mastermind program, which teaches you to have frame. If that guy gets more frame in the relationship, part of frame is creating, by my definition of frame, part of frame is being able to have and create more intense experiences for her. So that would be what the guy would need to do in that relationship to turn that around. And those intense experiences are usually of a sexual nature. All right. So when the guy gets better in the bedroom, and sometimes it's not always necessarily better, but more specific to her sexual triggers, okay, then it's because it's not about like necessarily anatomy. It's not necessarily about, well, he can last long or whatever. I mean, the guy could pop, you know, a bunch of Viagra and last forever and not give her a peak experience. So it's really about pressing the right buttons. And in my seduction program, we do that. We talk about that. And it's both in and out of the bedroom. It's both things. And that's the key to overcoming in a relationship, to the guy who's married and doesn't want to just divorce her, who's got a couple of kids with her, finds out, you know, and she finds out, I've been alpha widowed. And she won't say it like that, but it'll sound like my excitement and peak experiences were with previous guys, not with my current partner. There's ways to overcome it. Is it a sure thing? Not necessarily. Like if she's too imprinted, she won't overcome it. But is it possible? Well, yeah. At the very least, the guy with 2 kids with this woman in the marriage knows he would have tried everything before exiting. And then in the process of trying, he improves his sexual skills and abilities. So at the very least, he's able to have a better relationship with somebody different if it doesn't work with the one he tried to make it work with. So instead of breaking up a family, you know, a guy can actually try to do that, and do that even with cooperation with this girl. There are couples I've counseled and they've done that successfully and actually had success. It's just not a lot. I've coached more men. I've coached thousands of men. I've only done like handfuls of couples like that to really know. And it seems to have worked out. But that's the alpha widowing scenario. Okay. Is that it's one person. Now, having a lot of notches increases the probability or possibility of her having a peaked out experience that some guy that she wants to settle with can't compete with. So that's why that's dangerous, is the number. Now the number is also dangerous too for reasons not having anything to do with alpha widowing, but having to do with the neurochemical bonding mechanism. All right. So that's two things going on. And what's supposed to happen is when a girl has sex with somebody, she's supposed to have a feeling of oxytocin and neurochemical bond to that dude. Well, if she's practicing a lot of casual sexual relationships with breeders that she doesn't care about, she's getting her sexual thrills in, but not having the attachment. What is she doing? She's ingraining in her mind a polyamorous style, which is also part of our DNA too, right? So she's reinforcing a polyamorous style, not reinforcing, getting those needs met in the context of a relationship with a commitment. And so by reinforcing that polyamorous style, her neurochemicals in her good feelings and reward systems are rewarding new partners, are rewarding fresh partners, and rewarding no emotional attachment, rewarding breaking free from relationships, right? If there's a problem in a girl's casual, she just doesn't call the guy back, right? There is no learning skills and how to handle conflict, for example, or how to overcome, communication difficulties. Those things aren't happening much in casual scenarios. And so the girl is getting a lot of reps doing that. It's also wearing her neurochemical system down to a degree where sex is no longer being associated as a bonding mechanism. She's supposed to get a bunch of oxytocin that makes her want to stay with the guy that she's having sex with. But if she goes through 50 guys, is she getting that? You see? And that's the problem, right? That's the problem with the notches. We want to pick a girl who has the ability to bond with you, right? Has the capability of bonding with you, and also sees you as the best option, right? And sees that subjectively. If she goes through a bunch of guys, and I don't know what the magic number is because the data doesn't know. We don't know yet scientifically. We're in unprecedented territory. Girls who in polyamorous tribal times, right, who had sex with multiple people in the tribe, probably had sex with a handful of guys, anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 partners. Because these tribes weren't huge, right? They weren't in a global sexual marketplace with easy access to sexual options and blowing through 20 or 30 guys by the time she's 22 years old. So we're in unprecedented territory. We know it affects the neurochemical system. We just don't know how much, how bad, what's numbers do what. We don't know the details. We just know it's bad, right? And so that's the problem with a lot of notches. It's not necessarily alpha widowing. It's wearing down that neurochemical system. So sex no longer becomes a bonding mechanism. And now sex ends up being more or less used as a transactional tool potentially for the girl. I'll give sex to him when I want stuff and I'll take it away when I don't feel like it. Well, the girl's not going to feel like it when she doesn't have a new partner waiting for her because she's the last 50 times she's done it, minus maybe a couple of boyfriends, it's been short-term flings, and it makes her more likely to cheat because her neurochemicals reward new partner, right? It makes her more likely to devalue her partner because the emotional attachment isn't there. Anyway, it's a great question. And I could keep going. Okay. But to answer it, I don't know which it is necessarily. Why, but it's not so much the notch count that's causing it. It's really that peak experience, which is why the age gap is so damaging in a developing brain. And I'm urging you guys not to go there. And not only that, I'm urging a different narrative when you're raising your kids. Okay, we need to be telling teenagers to hold off, not bang until later in their adult life, when their brain's more developed, because the earlier they start, the more of a prognosis of failure, long-term pain and long-term suffering to themselves and to the men that they get involved with, the more probability that is. All right. So that's why I'm urging that, because the alpha widowing can happen when there's a maturity gap one time with a guy who has a significant amount of influence and power on her while she's too young and her brain is developing. And this is why I've had, like I said, and when I was single, like now it's not even a temptation. My girl's fine. Like there's no reason for me. I'm not even tempted to go, do anything. But when I'm single guy, of course, you get some hot girl and you find out she's like 19 and she's totally want to hook up with you. I mean, it's like, yeah, you're like, all right, maybe, right? But then you're like, no. You know what I mean? And so, and you'll see it, even my, friends of mine who've, seen me at the clubs in Canada where a lot of the girls are younger than 21. I definitely like have my interactions with them, but I put like a definite barrier there, and it would be there too, even if it wasn't for my girlfriend, because if I was single, I'm not just banging some 19-year-old. I'm just not doing it. You know what I mean? 22-year-old, sure, casual relationship, not a big deal. Yeah, maybe, right? Two consenting adults, but I know that if I start doing that with a girl who's too young, the risk is real high for me creating a peak experience for her that is not going to be reversible, for her, or give her a lot of problems later, and so it's just not something that I want to do. It's just not, and I don't recommend it. And if I'm promoting for my, my nieces and my, friends' daughters and my son's little girlfriends and stuff, if I'm promoting, not that I'm having all these conversations with them, but, promoting a message of don't be having sex too early. Well, I'm certainly not going to have sex with now an 18-year-old. Like, it's just no fucking way. You know what I mean? And so I urge you guys to do the same. And if there's anything you walk away with, I think that that's the message. All right. So I'm sure there's a lot of women who lived in 1880 who blew through 30 guys at 21 and brought. Yeah, probably. Well, of course, the hookers, absolutely. But, not all women were prostitutes, right? Most weren't. I'm looking at random questions. How can a woman who is alpha widowed resent the child that does not come from the alpha? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. How does this affect her maternal instinct? Yeah. Yeah. She can see that child potentially, not always. Okay. But infanticide or killing the kid or leaving the kid behind by the mother is a real phenomenon. And this is why, one of the reasons why being, a girl seeing another guy as a better option or as their best option in the past. Like, okay, so like look at retroactive jealousy, which is being jealous or concerned about experiences she's had by other men in the past. The reason that is such a deep threat for a man, okay, is because we want to ensure our paternity, not just our paternity, like, is the kid my kid, but also I want to ensure the success of that kid. In other words, I want the woman to take care of this baby. That's the hindbrain telling me to do that, right? And so, like, back in our those times, if she had a kid with the beta, right, or saw that guy as the beta, now she had these kids in tow with no protection from an alpha. Her natural proclivity is to want to discard those children. Those are the kids that got left in the woods somewhere while she went off with another tribe. Those are the kids that get self-aborted, so that she can make room for the alpha seed. And we've seen this in the animal kingdom, and we've seen it in human behavior in showing up in different ways. So absolutely, it's an absolute threat for you to have kids with a woman who doesn't see you as her best. 100%. It's a threat to your success as a man. It's a threat to your happiness in the relationship. It's a threat to the relationship staying together. And it's also a threat to the kids and how well invested she's going to be in taking care of those kids. 100%. All right. Now, last point I'll make, because it's a long stream. All right. So we want to ask, what about relationship success? So can a relationship with a large age gap, and that's 10 plus years, okay, be successful? All right. So a relationship 10 plus years, can it be, what's a probability? Well, first of all, we have to understand, what is our measure of success? Okay, so immediately someone's going to say, well, the bigger the age gap, the less likely it is that they can be successful. That would probably be a wrong assessment. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay, because the measure for success is not always is not really defined well. All right. So those who say, okay, the relationship success is less likely the bigger the age gap, what they're actually looking at is the chances of that relationship breaking up. Okay. Where the chances of the relationship divorcing, and then you look at divorce rates, is higher. All right. So the chances of divorce is higher and goes up for how much the age gap is. So the chances of divorce is lower when the age gap is like within a year, and it just gets worse. And so from 10 plus to 20 years, respectively, it's between like 39% more likely to divorce, up to 95% more likely to divorce if there's a 20-year gap. So someone might look like, for example, at my relationship, for example, and say, well, you're more likely to break up because of this gap. Well, here's the thing though. Breaking up isn't a measure for success. Not really. Your happiness in the relationship is. So you're looking at the wrong information, because most relationships break up. Most relationships don't last. So, having a 40% or a 90% chance based on that data point alone is kind of meaningless, because most relationships do break up, and then the ones that don't are unhappy. All right. So most relationships break up, and the ones that stay together are unhappy. That's the reality of it. It's only like 13%, according to a pretty good study that was done, that states that relationships long-term past the 8-year mark, there's a reason why they pick that number. All right. Are happy. Only 13% of them. And that's out of the one. So out of the so 55% of these relationships are divorcing. More than that, even, are breaking up. They're not more than most relationships are not making it to 8 years. And the ones that make it to 8 years, only 13% of those are happy. All right. So your measure for success in a relationship isn't how long you stay together, because what about the bottom, 87% that are various degrees of unhappiness that stayed together? I mean, to me, a successful relationship isn't together for 15 years, but I've been miserable for 12 of the 15 years. That to me is a failure. And that is what most of these relationships that last a long time are like. So I don't look at the probability of a breakup as a measure of success. It's not. In fact, most of the time, I will say, if I had a happy relationship with someone for a year or two, but then it was time to go because it got to be unhappy and our values didn't match, that to me is a success. I will say, many of my guys, my clients and my groups have had better relationships with women that didn't last than most guys will have for an entire marriage. Hell, my weekend with my girlfriend is better than some guys' entire relationships for their entire lives. Just a weekend. You know what I mean? In terms of how good we feel about each other and what we're experiencing and all what we're doing. So like a measure of success is happiness, not whether or not it stays together. You're looking at the wrong data because most of the relationships don't stay together. And in fact, it's not a measure of success because if the relationship is no longer viable for the two people, it needs to be over with, not together. Right. And so that's not the measure. The measure is, happiness and rates of happiness. And so when we look at, and also rates of like attractiveness, and then once again, 57% of women will date, have overtly said they'll date an older guy, meaning 10 plus years and, up to, 20, 25 years, doesn't matter. And 8%, by the way, 8% of marriages have a larger age gap of 10 plus years. So people get into these relationships all the time, and they are, in fact, successful based on happiness. Some of them do break up and might have a higher probability of ending than maybe not, but there's also, higher probability of happiness and them staying together. And that's what I'm going to get into. But, or, there's a plenty that stay together is really what I'm trying to say. Now, so when we look at rates of happiness, most relations are not unhappy, but 13% are, 6% are in total bliss. Okay, so very few, and I'm going to read a quote. All right, and this is, so very few studies have, and this is from a study, all right, that I looked at. Very few studies have explored the relationship process as they relate to age differences in romantic relationship. Grahn and Van Den Brink, 2002, examined the association between life satisfaction and marital age groups. The results reveal that an age gap in which the husband was older than the wife was associated with increases in life satisfaction for both men and women, consistent with the evolutionary perspective, which posits that relational age gaps are advantageous to the extent that the direction of the age gap maximizes each partner's potential for reproductive success. And then that's David Buss's quote, actually. So what are we saying? Okay, so when the relationship, the age gap gives an advantage to both partners. In other words, let's say 20-year age gap. Okay, let's look at, 25 and 45, because that's my relationship, right? If the 25-year-old girl sees the 45-year-old guy as advantageous, experiences that as an advantage in all of the categories of what she would find attractive in a guy, her satisfaction is going to be high and higher than it would be with a younger guy where those, advantages aren't there. And vice versa. If the 45-year-old guy sees the advantages associated with the age gap as higher than what he would have with a woman closer to his own age, he's going to experience, and she is going to experience, greater relationship satisfaction. Right. And so when we look at it from a point of relationship satisfaction and happiness, okay, not focusing on the relationships that didn't work out and breakups and then going, what percentage is this and that and the other, we're focusing on the wrong thing when we look at that data. Why we need to focus on the relationships that are successful. When we look at the relationships that are successful, they found, in that being measured by, some longevity past a certain year mark, usually the 8-year mark is used, right? And looking at things like age gap, what's found is that relationship satisfaction is higher in the age gap relationships where the man is of higher age. Okay. And that's 10 plus years. Relationship satisfaction is measured as higher for the relationships that worked out. Okay. Or that have been working out, not the ones that broke up where the numbers are higher in the breakup, but for the ones that are good. So we can look at it like this: bad relationships where people aren't meant, shouldn't be together, and ones where they're working out. Okay. The ones that are bad, yeah, higher percentage of them are age gapped. But of the ones that are good, that are working, where they're together, viable, the age gap relationships demonstrate higher success because the happiness rates are higher. And I'm not just talking, the 3 to 5 years. They were looking at 10 plus years. So that's what we're looking at. That's what we see. So can it work out? Yes. Age gap relationships not only can work out, but they tend to have higher satisfaction rates. And that's what some of the research and data shows, right? If it depends on what we focus on. If we're focusing on the relationships that are working and the people were together when the study was done and measuring satisfaction rates, we're going to find that the ones with the bigger age gaps plus 10 years are reporting higher satisfaction. Okay. So that flies in the face of this idea that women don't want older guys and all this stuff, and that it's a predatory relationship and it's not good. Bullshit. These relationships, 15, 20-year gaps, are happy for the guy and the girl. But the conditions are the guy has to be attractive. Okay. The guy has to offer her all the advantages of that age gap and be seen as the genetic option and best. So he has to be attractive. He has to take care of himself. He has to be, have that attractive behavior. And then she also has to bring him a bunch of advantages that, an attractive, fun, younger girl would bring. And when that's in play, you have a happier relationship. Now, I'm not suggesting that you hunt for one or the other. Just find an individual that you like and go be happy. But don't come in with a bias, though, thinking that it's one thing or the other. The data doesn't show that. All right. The data shows that evolutionarily speaking, okay, as long as the needs are getting met, the age gap actually doesn't matter. And in fact, the age gap works as an advantage to both people rather than a disadvantage. Now, all of this, of course, is assuming that everyone's a consenting adult. So age gaps, no problem. Good. All right. Going under 21, getting into teen years, trying to hook up with a girl when she's too young, probably not good. Probably damaging to that girl long-term and probably bad for your prognosis of success. So that's what it is. All right. And so that's it. I have a Seduction Mastermind program. It's open for a year. Show the commercial right in the beginning. You guys, if you want to know how to beat this hypergamy thing, beat the alpha widowing, all right? Not that you're in some competition with every guy she's been with, but you want to be the best, right? You want to be seen as the best. The surefire way to do that is to prove your abilities on not only selecting the right match for you in terms of women, but increasing your options. So you have a lot of options. And when you select the right matches for your relationships, you handle those relationships with rock solid frame. So she draws deeper and deeper into desire with you. That's what seduction is about and is. Okay. That is something that I offer in my year-long Seduction Mastermind program. The link is in the description. I really think that you should book your free call for that and see if you're a good candidate. All right. It's not a cheap program, but it's very involved. And actually, very soon, we're going to be covering sex topics in depth with course material. There's over 100 hours of course material in this thing that's only available to that group. And we're going to get into increasing your skills in the bedroom and sexual psychology. That's what's happening next with the group. So now's a really good time to get into it. If you're looking at having good relationships with women and having your options and also overcoming the problems with women today in the sexual marketplace and the problems with dating and the problems with relationships. If you want to overcome that, the quickest way to do that is frame. And of course, sexual skills is a massive part. So hope to see you in that program. I'm going to end the broadcast now. Take care.